our country. We come together when it counts, against fascism.
Theirs was the unquenchable spirit that triumphed over evil.
Against apartheid. Against injustice.
For equal rights.
In order to secure the vote.
To make poverty history.
To respond boldly to crises. To protect people.
Helping patients to help themselves.
And planet.
We keep our promises.
Please believe us when we said we will do absolutely everything we can.
Set ourselves bold goals to change the future and inspire the world.
2020 was a year like no other. But we stuck together.
We showed up for each other. We answered the call of a 23-year-old footballer and 100-year-old veteran.
And kept each other's spirits up.
We stood together to right what is wrong.
Now, in 2021, we still have huge challenges.
But we also have big opportunities.
To be the people who come together when it matters most.
To be the team that stands together to tackle COVID.
Injustice.
Climate change.
The biggest challenges of our time. Together, we can crack the crises.
Good evening and welcome to you all. Wow, that video gets me every time. Hi, my name is Louise and hopefully in a moment you will see Ben and the rest of the panel. If you guys could just put your cameras on. Fantastic. Well, we've got a packed programme for you this evening and we're absolutely delighted to have you all and that you've taken the time to join us. So before I do anything else, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel to you. And please do say hello in the chat at the bottom. And if you can, let us know where you're joining us from. So we've got Cel Spellman here this evening. Do you want to give us a wave, Cel? You probably know him, actor and Radio 1 DJ. Seen him on Waterloo Road, Cold Feet, White Lines, and he is an ambassador to the Wildlife Trust, so we're really chuffed to have him here tonight. We've got Craig Bennett, former CEO of Friends of the Earth and now our inspiring new leader. Give us a wave, Craig. And the Wildlife Trust movement is 46 local wildlife trusts with over 850,000 members and 35,000 volunteers. And Craig has kindly agreed to give us 2 talks tonight. Joining us a little bit later on, we'll have Claire Coutinho, politician for the Conservative Party and MP for Surrey East. She'll be joining us later and talking to us about lobbying. Stephanie Todd, also known as Sustainable Stephanie. She is Sustainability Manager at Kingston University and also a great Instagrammer on environmental issues. Sarah Jane Chimbwandira, CEO at Surrey Wildlife Trust, and Sarah Jane's going to be talking to us about nature-based solutions to climate change. And Katy Fielding, our Hedgerow Heritage Project Officer, who's going to be wowing us about hedgerows. So welcome to you all. Now, Ben, if you don't mind just sharing the agenda for tonight, and I'll just share a bit of housekeeping with you all. You got that, Ben? Just show you the order of events for the talks. So you can use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask us questions whenever you like. Cel is going to be answering questions after his talk, but for the rest of the panel, we're going to have questions at the end at 8 o'clock, but do ask questions all the way through the evening. We've also going to be asking you questions. You've already had a poll, but we have got lots of polls to ask you questions so you can share your views and give us some feedback. Use the chat function too to give us comments and feedback. It's all only shared with the panel. Not everyone will see what you say. And if you want to ask a question anonymously, you have the option to do that. I have to tell you that the event is being recorded, and we will send you a copy of the recording, and we'll be sending it out to other schools as well. There are some big issues that we're talking about tonight, and if you find this a little bit overwhelming, or if you have any grief, anger, blame, hope or hopelessness, they're all absolutely valid and appropriate responses to the massive problems that we're facing. So we're going to give you a toolkit of actions you can take. And that really helps. But if you're finding it all too much, then we'll be sending you a web link to the Climate Psychology Alliance, who have over 70 psychotherapists who are there signed up to give free support on issues such as climate change for people who are struggling with it. So I'm just going to hand over now to Cel, if that's okay.
To be with you all. Oh, am I unmuted? I was chatting away there to myself. Again, hello everyone. Thank you to Louise for kicking off this brilliant event, and thank you to the Wildlife Trust Surrey for hosting this event and creating the space to have this conversation. Because for me, you know, conversation, awareness and education are three of the key elements when it comes to the climate crisis and how we can go about to seeing that change. And as Louise said as well, I feel I couldn't begin by not just saying how proud I am to be a Wildlife Trust ambassador. I'm very fortunate that I've been working in this space a long time, but I think sometimes we can get a little bit overwhelmed by seeing the big problem and forgetting there's a lot of things that we can do here right at home, particularly in the United Kingdom. And the Wildlife Trust, with their trust up and down the country, are a really brilliant space for us to start, for us to look at kind of how we can rewild our country and how we can go about championing nature and looking at those nature-based solutions and making sure that we've got it right here at home first before looking elsewhere. But in particular, one of my favorite things around this event is the focus is around young people. And young people, for me, I get asked a lot, you know, what brings you hope? That big question, that big word, what brings you hope? Which I always think is it's a bit of a funny word in a way, but my answer is always the same. One of my biggest sources of hope, you know, aside from my family and friends and people like David Attenborough, genuinely is young people. And where I've been fortunate enough to work so closely with young people across a number of years now, you guys never cease to blow me away with how in tune you are, how aware you are, and your absolute drive and commitment for speaking up about the things you care about, for pointing out things that are wrong when you see it, and your very simple and honest way and outlook you have on the world and the way things should be. And I just wish and hoped that if more adults were to listen and take note from you guys, I have absolutely no doubt that the world would be a brighter, better, greener, more sustainable place. So to begin with, I want to say thank you for being a source of inspiration and hope. And I don't think just for me, but for so many other people, but also for the work that you've all done so far. I don't know if you will all be aware, but your voices, the voices of youth, are some of the strongest and loudest voices we have when it comes to climate change and trying to fight the climate crisis. Because we as adults, you know, and I don't consider myself an adult yet, but where I'm a little bit older, you know, we enter these same space and we have the same conversations. And the thing that it always comes back to is, what is it that young people want now? What is it that they're looking for? And when you speak, everybody listens. And it is our duty as adults and people that are older than me to make sure that we are listening and acting upon the things that you want to be acted upon, whether that be the rights for all children around the world, whether that be for the environment, whether that be something around education in your school, whatever it is that you care about or are passionate about, we should be doing all we can to support you with that. And this is a great example of us empowering you, but I know that we need to do a lot more. And some examples I've seen, and I'm sure you'll have all seen over the last couple of years, of young people really driving the conversation and really putting pressure on those that need the pressure applying, for example, would be the school climate strikes. That single-handedly has been one of the greatest and most driven movements I think we've seen in the climate space, or I've experienced over the last 5 to 10 years. And why? Because young people are at the heart of it. And I think it really did make people stop and listen, which I think is really hard to do in the climate space at times, but you guys managed to do it. So credit to you all. And I think we all, I think I can speak for everyone, we say, I absolutely stand and support you on this movement, and hope that if we keep doing it and keep shouting loud enough, those in a position of power are going to start listening and are going to start bringing about action. So that was an example, I guess, in the broader sense. There was a great example in the smaller sense when it looks at individual action, because I think Louise alluded to it there. It can be very overwhelming when talking around climate and our environment and our future, and in particular for you young people, because I'm very aware that it's you guys that are going to be living with the impact and the consequences of our actions now and of our actions in the past. So you have every right to feel all those things that Louise mentioned and be more and more, you know, be angry, be frustrated. But with the overwhelming feeling, I'd say a story I saw yesterday quite timely to really give you kind of that, I don't know, source of inspiration for you guys, and know that you actually can make a difference and don't feel like little old me can't do anything, was the story of young Sky, who some of you might have heard, but if you haven't, it just really kind of, it says everything that I tried to say here in 10 minutes. Sky wrote, I think, to all leading supermarkets around a problem she found with plastic toys that were on the front of magazine. I'm sure lots of you enjoy getting your magazines. I did too when I was younger. But seeing that maybe this was an unnecessary use of plastic, and there was so much of it. If you think how many magazines are being cycled through around the country, it's probably quite a frightening stat. So Sky took it upon herself to write to the supermarkets to say, is there anything you can do, or can we be doing things a little bit better? I think she probably said it a little bit more eloquently than me there. She then didn't hear anything, but after a couple of weeks, Waitrose have been back in touch to say that they received Sky's letter, and in turn, over the next 8 weeks, are going to basically get rid of all magazines and stop stocking magazines that have a plastic toy on the front, because they agreed it was totally unnecessary. Now, that is one person, not just one person, that is one young person who has taken it upon themselves to go out there and try and make a difference. And boy, has she. And the ripple effect that that one letter will send, because I'm pretty sure it won't just be Waitrose that take notice, it will then be Sainsbury's and Asda, and in turn, maybe the magazine companies will then look to go, maybe we shouldn't put plastic toys on the front. That came from one letter. And it said everything to me about, you really can go out there and be the change that you want to see in the world. Never let anyone or anything in the world stop you from doing what it is you want to do, or following the dream that you want to follow, or trying to bring about that change that you want to see. You absolutely can make it happen. And I'd like to think I'll do all I can to help make that happen. And along with all the brilliant people at this event tonight, and your teachers and your parents and friends around you, you can do all those things. And I guess I'll wrap up, because I know I've waffled on here and I apologise. But I was very fortunate enough to meet one of, I think Amy's just popped in. Yeah, I'll answer some questions if you have any. To meet one of my heroes, and a man that has given nature a voice like no other, really. The great Sir David Attenborough, the legend, the big man. And one thing he said in my interview, which has stuck with me, and I think is great to share, when I said to him, you know, what is your one advice for young people? And it was very simple. He said, of course, about reconnecting with nature, but his biggest thing he said was, whatever it is that you love, or whatever it is that you like, do that. Go and follow that star. And usually what you'll find is the thing that you love or you're passionate about is the thing that you're good at. And don't let anyone ever stop you from doing that. And I think that's something I try and live my life by. And hopefully you can do the same as well. But I do just want to say genuinely, you know, you guys play a really important role in trying to help turn the tide on climate change. The responsibility and onus is definitely not on you. But I promise you when I say that you have one of the strongest and most powerful voices, and we are all ready to listen, and we are all ready to make the change. So use that voice, use your frustration, use your anger, and go out there and change the world, because I've been saying it for years and I'll continue to say it, that young people can and absolutely will change the world. And when you're all in big positions of power and you're running the companies, just don't forget Cel or the Wildlife Trusts, because we got you there. But I'll stop waffling on. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. But I know as well there's some more brilliant speakers coming. So the event needs to flow on through. A pleasure. But thank you so much for having me. And guys, keep on doing what you're doing. It's making a massive difference.
Thank you so much, Kel. Ben, do you want to put the poll up before we ask questions?
Yeah, so we have polls throughout the evening, just so like we had the one at the beginning. We've got polls throughout the evening after each speaker speaks. So it gives you a chance to sort of answer a question that they covered in their topic and see you know, what kind of thoughts you have around it, and then maybe give us something for discussion once they've you know, once you've voted, and see what you have to say. So that should have popped up on your screens now. So if you can all start voting, hopefully, and then we can see. So the question for this one is about, what do you perceive to be the biggest barriers to taking action? So is it because you don't feel like there's any support? Is it because your lives are too busy? Would it just cost too much money? Is it a transport issue? Can you not access any opportunities? Is it because your people around you just aren't interested and you don't want to be a lone wolf? Do you feel like there's just nothing you can do? And if there's something else, just throw it in the chat so we can have a look at what you're all thinking as well.
Great question.
The votes are still coming in. We're up to about 55. So I'll leave the poll on for a few more moments. So give everyone a chance to vote. But it's so far, it's a pretty even spread across all of those different things. Okay, I'm just going to end it there and share the results so you can have a look at them, Cal. Just bear with Zoom a second to do its thing. It's trying to end it. There we go. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the results there. So before we go into the questions that have come through, Cal, do you feel like you have anything to say about what people have submitted? Is there any advice you can give them on those barriers?
I guess, I'll try and quickly pass a comment on each, because it feels like you say there was a great spread. The biggest one being no support from school and organisations, which I think is a very valid frustration. But I guess to come over that frustration, one of the things I'd say is, have you really though gone out your way to let them know your frustrations, that you don't feel supported? Because sometimes, and I found this, I thought in my charity work, I feel like maybe I could be getting a bit more help there, but I didn't ask. And the minute that you ask, you'll usually find that people are very willing to help. And I definitely know for schools, if you speak to your teacher or your head teacher, they're there to help you. So if you're finding that a little bit, maybe try and actually, go, I'm going to have the conversation, or I'm going to write a letter to my head teacher, and then see then what response you get. But I think actually sometimes we forget to really voice our frustrations, which I think is, it happens, that's life. But make sure you've heard that you don't feel supported, and people usually will go out the way to support you. Lives are too busy. I get that, it's a tricky one, but if you can, maybe make a bit more time and space in your day, even if it's 15 minutes, to just go and tend to a few plants maybe you're growing in your garden. But I think we can always make a little bit more time. Money, I totally get that one, that's tough, but there are so many things that you can do that don't require money. So I think that's, definitely look for those alternatives. Even if it's going out to help a local project in your community, or maybe it's something in your school gardens and you can get a bit of an allotment growing. I think if you look, there'll be other ways where you don't have to spend money to go out there and try and make a difference, or take some action. Totally get the access to opportunities. I think that's a bigger picture where we have to look to maybe more the powers that be to help create the structure and parameters for us to be able to take action in, so it's accessible for everyone. I think that's totally a valid thought. And as for the feeling of, I don't think there is anything I could do, kind of what I was saying in my talk before, you absolutely can and be a massive difference. Even if it's just that one thing you do, that one habit you change, or that one conversation you had with the friend who isn't interested, that is making a difference. So the tiniest thing is still going out there and doing something. There's always that one tiny thing you can do. And if you find your friends aren't interested, spaces like this and using community groups and charity organizations is a great way to find like-minded people like you that care about the same stuff that you care about. So I'm sure the Wildlife Trusts have a whole collection of resources and maybe different community projects that you could maybe go down to find some people who are like-minded. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Cole. Yeah, there was some great advice there. And there's a couple of other things that have come in the chat as to what that other option was about. And mostly it seems to be people saying that they feel a bit frustrated that the sort of government legislation isn't supporting them, and they're a bit worried about protests being shut down and schools condemning them for joining climate protests. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think they're all so valid as well. And I think actually the feelings that you've all spoke about there are feelings that I feel as well. As far as when it comes to government advocacy, so to speak, and I've done a little bit in that space, you guys will be really surprised to know that an easy thing I'd say for MPs or politicians to say is that they don't hear from young people. And because they don't hear from you, they go, we don't really know what they want. But I made a little video, which I can actually send maybe to the Wildlife Trust, but about how you can talk to your MP. And it's so simple. You just write a letter maybe with your parents, or you can write them an email if you've got an email, and start that conversation. That is one of the easiest things you can do. And don't forget, these people are there for you. They're in the position they're in to go about making the world a better place for you and supporting you in what you need. That is fundamentally their job. So they have to listen to you and they have to respond. So I would say, and it's something I always fall back on, do write to your MP. It feels like you think, what's that going to do? But they have to acknowledge it. That's part of their job. So that is a great first step. You can go in, all right, that's how I can get my voice heard. And as far as feeling, that from kind of schools and what protesting is, around the worries around protesting, it is difficult. But for me, and I can only speak for me personally, I really believe and care about the planet, the climate, and my future. And at the moment, there is scientific fact, and there are so many stories out there that our futures are hanging in the balance. The impact on the planet is horrendous and is only getting worse, and we're not seeing much done about it. So they're always the points that I go, okay, does that validate for me why I'm here? Yes. So if someone was to try and argue with me, and arguments are an important thing because you have to have both sides of the coin and you have to listen. But if I feel comfortable enough to when people go, well, I don't think you should do this and do that, I'm ready to say why I am there. And the only person that you need to validate why you're there is with yourself, nobody else. It doesn't matter if you want to stand on the street or you want to, go on a school strike on a Friday, as long as you've, made sure it's okay with your parents and everyone knows where you are and it's safe, then you should go and do that. And you don't have to answer to anybody else for that. And if someone does maybe want to entertain the conversation, that's then when you can go, well, listen, I actually care, because you might not know, we're destroying the Amazon rainforest, which is affecting weather systems, which in turn is going to affect me here in the UK. And I actually quite care about the animals that call the Amazon home. That's why I'm here. And I think people would find it pretty hard to argue with that. So find those reasons why you're there, hold on to them, and let them carry you through.
Fab, thanks, Kel, for that. So we've got just about 5 minutes left for some of the questions that have come through. So some of your questions, guys, I think are fantastic, but we might save them for the panel at the end and just ask Kel the ones that sort of most about what he was talking about. So we've got a good one here. What first got you into thinking about sustainability?
You know what? I think I answered a question around this today. I have one of my not earliest memories, because my earliest memories is around me adopting a dolphin called Lightning when I was 7, which was great. But one of my early memories of kind of bringing me round to this was when I was in school. The lesson I had around global warming, which happened in science, and which is the same as climate change. They've just changed it to climate change, global warming, which I think is a bit scary, actually. But I remember learning the lesson on global warming and, how we had these gases that were polluting the atmosphere and destroying the ozone layer, and the earth was heating up. And I remember asking, I think, a question going, so what's being done about it? And even then the teacher was like, I'm not too sure. It's just kind of this thing that's happening. And that's always stuck with me, because I couldn't quite understand how something so bad was happening. And we were kind of in a way directly part of why it was happening, and nothing was being done. So I think that is one of the earliest memories I can look back on that I think really put me on the road to wanting to go, all right, I need to learn more about what I can do and how we can go about stopping this from happening. So I think that was probably a turning point for me.
Awesome. So next question, I quite like this one. What was it like meeting David Attenborough? He is a legend. I would love to meet him.
He said it there. He really, really is. It was it's funny, even hearing you ask the question, and saying it. I still can't quite believe it. It was a real dream come true. You know, he's one of my heroes, and I can honestly say he is everything you want him to be and more. He's just the most kind, generous, thoughtful human being that is just so present, and God love him. You know, he's a 93, 94-year-old man. You really wouldn't know it from being able to talk with him. But it was a dream come true. And yeah, they say don't meet your heroes. That's the cliche saying, isn't it? But I can say that doesn't stand for when meeting David Attenborough. And I also know, and I'm sure you've all heard and seen, but he's constantly championing and talking about the power of young people and how that they've been a real big source of hope and inspiration for him as well. So you're all doing something right.
Fab. So next one, going back to what you're talking about with protesting, do you think protesting actually gets the message across, or does it just make people ignore us because it's inconvenient?
I don't think it does, personally. I think if it's inconvenient, then it's good, because at least people are having to take note in a way. And I think it can feel like that, but I talk a bit around this actually, and my response is always this: if you look through history as we know it, modern day history, any big movement or change that has happened has come from, first of all, one individual person it started with, second of all, a mass movement of people, third of all, through protesting. And the examples I give, for example, are Gandhi. You look at what one man did there for the people is huge. Where I'm from in Manchester, there's a lady called Emily Pankhurst, who was arguably the key figure in enabling and getting the right for women to vote, which happened obviously way too late. But it all started with her standing up, saying, I've not had enough, gathering people that felt the same and having protests and creating a movement. Martin Luther King started with not just one man there was a whole, I think, group of people. But again, that was a mass movement of people, a protest about something that had to change. And with enough people power and with enough people pressure, I wholeheartedly, firmly believe that protesting can absolutely work and does work. As I say, and I think, you know, Craig here and people who have been around maybe the climate space for longer will say what Extinction Rebellion done and what the school climate strikes have done is what some people and organisations have been trying to do for 10, 15 years. You guys have done it in 2. So on that basis, the example is there and the case studies are there for us to look back on and go, protesting and using your voice and standing up for what you believe in. And also money talks, where you spend your money is a big one as well. Absolutely does work and is going to be a key component in how we can go about getting the changes we want to see.
Fantastic. So just another one sort of following on from that.
Yeah.
Just because protesting doesn't always help us get our point across, what do you suggest as steps we can take to help if protesting doesn't work?
Yeah, the first one, I think I kind of touched upon it there. As you get older as well, how you spend your money is massive, because I think we're all aware that we, particularly in the Western world, money is kind of at the root of everything. That thing called profit seems to be put before people and before the planet. So off that, what you can use then is the way that you spend your money and who you choose to invest in and who you choose to give your time and energy to is massive. Because if suddenly businesses aren't getting your money, which they're there to do, and they'll have to start going, well, why aren't we getting their money? And if it's because their ethics are wrong, they're an unsustainable business, they're destroying the planet, then either they're going to go out of business or they're going to have to change a way of doing things. So money is single-handedly one of the easiest and most powerful tools that you have in your arsenal, if not protesting. And then again, I go back to writing to your MP, writing to your councillor if you see something in your local area and go, why aren't we caring for those gardens? I think actually taking more time and yes, it requires a little bit more work and a little bit more energy, but those things do matter and do make a difference. So they would be, I'd say, 2 things that are easily go to, and don't underestimate as well the power of a conversation. You know, as I think I said it before, if you have conversation with a friend and just even make them think about maybe I won't eat as much meat, or maybe I will go spend a bit more time in that nature reserve. It's the most amazing thing you could have done. And that's my belief as well. If I can change one person's opinion, or maybe bring one person on board, or make them think about something a little bit differently, not even change their opinion, then that's how we grow and that's how we move forward.
Great. So I think we're pretty much out of time now, unfortunately. I know lots of you have asked questions. I think Cal has covered some of the ones that have come through already. So I'll just tick those as answered, if that's okay. Lots of the others I think will be great to save for the poll later. There is just one, I think it's quite a good one just to finish on. It's a really short one. Are you a vegetarian or a vegan?
I'm a vegetarian. I wish I could say I was a vegan.
Fab.
But yeah, it's again, that's another thing. I think we get too bogged down and you have to be full vegan. It's not the point. The point is, I think if we all just are a little bit more conscious and are a little bit more thoughtful in our habits, that's the point. So I wish I could say I was vegan, but I do love a little bit of milk in a cup of tea. And I've tried all the alternatives and it just doesn't do it on a brew for me. But other than that, apart from a few things, I'm vegetarian and try my absolute best to be. But we're not all perfect, and I think that's the point.
Well, thank you so much, Cal. That was all really inspiring, and thank you so much for giving up your evening and joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone as well.
Okay then, so now we're going to hand over to Sarah Jane, who is going to be talking to us about nature-based solutions for climate change.
Well, thank you very much. What an act to follow, goodness me. If I'd have known, I might have said I wasn't going to go immediately afterwards, but I think that was a fantastic opening to our event this evening, and very many thanks. I certainly, as a mother of 3 teenagers myself, I really deeply believe that you do have the power in your hands to change your future, but I also believe very strongly that it's the role and the responsibility of organisations like the Wildlife Trust to help you to do that and to give you the support that you need to make those changes. And as Cel was just saying, it's not just about the big changes, it's about the small changes that all of us can make on an individual basis. We all have the power to make those choices and create that change that we need. And I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change and nature-based solutions, and the fact that actually climate and nature are not separate things here. They are integral elements. They are both part of the system which we are part of. They're not separate things, and therefore thinking about them separately sometimes can create a distinction which isn't necessary. And just to warn you, I'm going to start off by painting the picture of where we are now, which is worrying. And as Louise said earlier, there are places where you can go to talk through some of those issues if they concern you. But I'll finish by talking about what we can do to make things better and why we have the ability to make that change. So this is where we are now. We know that we have this ecological crisis at the moment where our species are declining both globally. In Surrey, we know that we've lost or are losing 1/3 of our species. And we also know that many countries are at risk of their ecosystems reaching collapse because we haven't been paying regard to the importance of having those species in place. We also know that the climate crisis is urgent and is upon us, experiencing the impacts of that already in our day-to-day lives. And the picture you can see there is of a wildfire in Surrey on one of our national nature reserves, Chobham Common, which took place just last year and required people to be evacuated from their houses. So we're already experiencing some of those changes. We also know, and we've seen over the last year, just how important nature is to all of us. Over the last year, so many people identified that being able to go out for a walk in nature during the lockdown period was one of the most important aspects of life during that time. But we also know that some communities, younger people and people in BAME communities, often struggle to be able to access these spaces. And in a county like Surrey, we know that actually less than 1/4 of the county contains green spaces that people can walk to. Often you have to get in a car and drive there. So that immediately makes access more difficult. And we also know, because of the COVID-19 situation, that it has shone a very bright light on the way in which we manage our economic affairs. And we know that people are experiencing the impact of the economic downturn at the moment. And again, this is something which, as younger people and myself as a mother, I was concerned about. How are we going to make sure that we build the economy back in a better way, so that not only is our environment healthier, but that also we have jobs and opportunities within that that you are able to fill. And I think one of the interesting areas, which I'll mention a little bit later on, is how we can actually start to think in a little more integrated way to solve these challenges. And this is really why it matters. You can see here Chobham Common National Nature Reserve. It's a lowland heathland. Lowland heathland is one of the most pressured habitats that we have globally. And here in Surrey, we look after a huge proportion of the lowland heathland that remains in the world. And this site is not only important because it's a fantastic landscape, it's something which people enjoy visiting, they enjoy walking in, but simply by existing, this site is also sequestering or storing carbon for us. And it does that job just because it's there. And I think this is one of the most recognizable things about a healthy natural environment, is that it actually delivers a huge number of different benefits from us just by being there and just by being healthy. And these services which we gain from the environment, whether it's the provision of food or fuel, or whether it's regulating our climate or regulating flood, for example, or whether it's the cultural benefits that we have around going for a walk and enjoying time in the open air, these are benefits which we all experience and which we rely on in able to be healthy ourselves. And we've done quite a lot of work on this actually in Surrey. And Surrey, you may not know, is one of the most wooded counties in England, which is quite a surprising statistic when you actually think about the county and what people may understand Surrey as being very close to London, with lots of people that commute into the city for their daily job. But actually those woodlands in Surrey are doing a huge amount for us every year. They have a value of over 90 million every year that they provide to us just by existing, whether that's from the timber production that we get from them, whether it's the function that those woodlands provide in cleaning the air, or whether it's again the carbon storage or the benefit that we have from visiting those woodlands. They are providing us with a huge amount of benefit. And one of the challenges in the past is that we haven't really recognised that benefit in any meaningful way. But now we actually understand how important those natural assets are to us. We are looking at how we look after them in the long term. And one of the really good things from my perspective, having worked in nature conservation now for over 20 years, is that the conversation is really starting to open up, and talking about protest, talking about how do you create change, actually we are starting to see some of that change happen. We could question whether it's happening quickly enough, but we certainly are having conversations now that we would not have been having 20 years ago. And we know that by creating connected areas of nature that are linked up, that are in good condition, we can actually create the solutions that we're looking for. We call these solutions nature-based solutions, and I think they're a really good example of how we can actually provide a much more integrated approach to solving some of these societal challenges that we have. The economy, our health, the climate, biodiversity, they are all connected, they are not separate. And if we're going to solve the challenges that we have now, if we are going to be more resilient in the future, then we need to actually bring forward solutions that integrate these different elements. It is also really important that we do this in a way that's transparent, that's inclusive across different communities, and that actually recognises that we may have to make balanced trade-offs between achieving different objectives. And just to really quickly give you a few examples of what nature-based solutions actually mean in reality, what do they look like in practice? Well, I was really delighted to find the picture on the top left-hand corner there, giving you an example of a bus in Singapore that has a green roof on top of the bus, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And one of the projects that we're going to be looking at Surrey Wildlife Trust in the near future will be pollinator pit stops. So basically putting green wherever we can on bus stops across the county to create those refuges for our wild pollinators, to give them places for food, to give them places for being able to thrive. Looking at how we can bring greenery across any opportunity within our urban environment, really important, whether it's living walls, whether it's lampposts that are retrofitted with greenery, very, very important for us to take those opportunities. And the picture on the bottom left-hand side that you can see there, which is a lamppost with a green pillar, if you like, is a really great example of how technology and engineering also comes into play when we're putting these solutions in place. And this is where some of the jobs and the skills of the future will sit, actually designing these sorts of solutions and making them work. So that lamppost is powered by solar panels and also has basically a computer at the bottom of it, which collects data on air quality and carbon storage for that particular lamppost. So really interesting blending of skills and knowledge there. And then on the right hand side, we can see what we call sustainable urban drainage systems, whether it's rain gardens in a local estate there, or whether it's providing opportunities for road runoff to be captured and cleaned. And we were talking, Kel was talking really eloquently there about what can we all do as individuals. Well, just having, even if you've only got a really small area, a patch at home, a window box, anything, that makes a difference. Introducing that greenery, not only to benefit biodiversity, but also to provide that carbon storage function, really important. And Surrey as a county has over 20,000 hectares of garden. So if we were all to do something with that, we would make a huge difference collectively. And then looking at a slightly bigger scale, you can see here a landscape in Surrey that sits between two of our major towns, Redhill and Oxted. And you can just see highlighted there all the different things that this land is providing for us, these services that we're getting from the land. And by investing in making those services, those areas really healthy, we can actually increase the benefits that we get from those areas of land over a long period of time, ranging from flood alleviation, carbon storage, to actually running businesses that depend on the landscape, and to increasing not only our biodiversity, but really importantly, our bioabundance as well. And just to finish, I'd like to leave you with the thought that this is a really important year for us. It is a year for us to come together and make the change that we need, because we have two really important events happening. We have the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, which is happening in May. And then in November, of course, we have COP26. And if you Google both of these opportunities, you will find that there are ways in which you can get involved. And certainly during the year, the Wildlife Trust will be letting you know about things that you can engage with to help be part of that conversation and make the change that's needed. And I'll just finish with this final picture here, which I hope I can move on to, but I think the poll might have stopped that actually, so apologies for that. I don't think you'll be able to see the final picture there, which is a bit of a shame because it was a great one, but not to worry, and hopefully I might be able to show it to you at a later stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sarah Jane. Sorry about your final picture there, but don't worry, everyone. We will send around the slides in the follow-up emails as well. So we've just got our second poll come up about what Sarah Jane was speaking about, nature-based solutions. So have a quick vote in that. We're going to collate these poll results and discuss them more broadly in the panel at the end, because we don't have time between each speaker. So I will leave that open for a few minutes while our next speaker gets set up. So I'll hand over to Lou now to introduce him.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sarah Jane. We're going to hand over to Craig Bennett now. And I'll just move that poll.
Great, thanks, Lou. Very good evening, everyone. Great to be joining you. I'm thrilled to be able to join you in Surrey tonight, as it were. I'm speaking from Cambridge, but I know actually there's people not just from Surrey, but from actually all over the world joining this gathering tonight. So it's fantastic. I've been asked to speak to you about the state of nature, and I've got a few just slides to kind of talk us through this. And it starts off, you know, pretty depressing, but don't worry, I'm then going to be talking about what we do about it. And, you know, that's clearly very important. Look, the first thing just to bear in mind, I'm going to start with a particular image that you'll be very familiar with. And it's a beautiful image, isn't it? And it is something that we should never forget, that everything, as far as we're aware, as far as we know at the moment, everything that has ever lived has lived there. Mind-blowing, isn't it? And maybe there is life on other planets. Maybe there's life across the rest of the universe. There's every chance there is. But everything we've ever known has lived in that beautiful blue marble floating in space. And you would have thought, therefore, we'd look after it, wouldn't you? But sadly, that's not what we're doing, as I know you will know. Sadly, actually, we're facing appalling climate change, and Sarah Jane has already talked you through some of that. But perhaps if you haven't seen this, this is another way of visualizing just how serious climate change is. This represents annual global temperatures from 1850 through to basically current day. And as the colors change from blue to red, you can see just how we've seen that increase in global temperatures over that last 150, 170 years or so. And you can see very clearly that warming trend. But on top of climate change, we're also facing this global ecological emergency. And there's really no one picture that can summarize this. But this graphic from Science magazine really pulls it together quite neatly from a year or two ago. And if you look at those declines in nature, it's all very sobering. Ecosystem extent and condition declined by 47% on average in the history of our civilization, as it were. Species extinction risk, approximately 25% of our species globally are already threatened with extinction. Ecological communities, in other words, the integrity, the fact, do our ecosystems work? Are they a community that can work together as a ecosystem? Declined by 23%. Biomass and species abundance, I'm going to talk a fair bit about this, but global biomass of wild mammals has fallen by 82%. It's absolutely astonishing, isn't it? It's estimated that roughly 5 out of every 6 wild mammals has gone. And it's been also estimated that wild mammals now make up only 4% of the mammalian biomass, with domestic livestock comprising 60% and humans the remaining 36% of biomass globally. And obviously also the incredibly important role that nature plays, particularly for the poorest communities in the world, indigenous communities. Estimated that something like 600 million people worldwide live directly on nature. What I don't mean they go to the shop to buy food, they actually will harvest food directly from nature, and so they're most dependent on it. And yet we're seeing all of those in decline. It's not very clever, is it, for us as humans? And then just to underline this point that Sarah Jane was just talking about, but I love this graph because of just the other point that it shows about how these issues are inextricably linked. You know, we have no hope of solving climate emergency unless we can put nature into recovery. No, we have no hope of solving the ecological crisis unless we also tackle climate change. And this graph shows that very clearly, because what this graph shows is concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how they've increased over, say, the last 50, 60 years. And you'll probably be aware of that graph broadly. But you might wonder why. Why is it that it changes each year? Why is it that concentrations of carbon dioxide go up and down? If you see there, that red line going up and down, every year that is. So actually it goes up in autumn and winter, concentrations of carbon dioxide. This is globally. And then down a bit every spring and summer. What's going on there? Well, when I talk about our spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere, so because the Northern Hemisphere has a bigger land mass than the Southern Hemisphere, what you're seeing there when it goes down each year is vegetation coming into bloom in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a big intake of breath, essentially, by vegetation in the Northern Hemisphere. This is a graph of the Earth breathing. That's what you see there. And that shows the connection between climate and nature, perhaps more clearly than anything ever could. We cannot solve one unless we solve the other. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. Of course we do. We have to stop the burning of fossil fuels, absolutely crucial. But we also have to put nature into recovery. And don't let anyone tell you that they're separate issues. They're really just slightly different symptoms of the same issue, I would say. The problem is, as we were seeing, we haven't done a very good job of protecting nature. We have actually harmed the ability of nature to help us in tackling the climate emergency and many other problems as well. This is actually a graph showing the percentage of originally present species remaining in the UK. So in the dark areas, not surprising, if you look at London and other big cities, there's actually a smaller proportion of species that were once there remaining. And it's not so bad in other areas, but really, there's very few parts of the UK where you see more than 90% of species that were there once still there. And this is, I was saying I was going to talk about abundance a bit. The State of Nature report was a report published in 2019. You can find it online, produced by a whole coalition of NGOs, of course, including the wildlife trusts. And this shows the decline in the abundance of our wildlife species since the early 1970s. So I'm about to say in my lifetime, actually what we've seen is 41% of wildlife species in this country decline in abundance. And it was the case in the 1970s, 1980s. I remember when I was a kid, you know, you'd go on a long drive on a family holiday, and at the other end of it, the front of the car, the windscreen or the number plate would be covered in kind of squashed insects because that's how abundant they were. That doesn't happen now. But the problem is that when I was a kid, already nature was depleted. If I went back to my grandparents, they would have remembered insect species even higher abundance. This is the thing called the shifting baseline syndrome. So the problem is we all kind of think that nature, we obviously think back to how nature was when we were children, and that's our reference point. But everyone alive today, their reference point was already of nature being severely degraded and depleted. So actually, when we talk about restoring abundance of nature, we've got to get it back to how it was 300, 400 years ago, that kind of level at the very least, rather than just thinking of getting it back, say, to the 1970s. So you can see that there's been this decline in abundance. So you ask yourself, well, why has this happened? And of course, there's a huge plethora of reasons, and you can't point the finger in any one place. But I said I live in Cambridge, and this is just a field near me. And I just show this photo to give you a sense of, it just summarizes, you know, what we've done, particularly in this country, but right around the world. We have essentially overrun the earth. That's Sir David Attenborough's phrase. We've overrun the earth. We've cleared so much of our habitat to make way for agriculture or for and for growing food or for growing fiber, for clothes or whatever. We've done that. And then we've also used chemicals. We've used pesticides. So we've done two things at the same time. We've destroyed habitat and we've hit abundance directly by using pesticides. And actually, in the process, we've also broken down some of the connections between different components of nature. And that's kind of caused a real problem. So to solve this, very simply, it comes down to three things. We've got to make more space for nature. We've got to restore the abundance of nature. And we've got to get nature working again. And what I'm going to do is just give you some examples of how we're trying to do that across the wildlife trusts, across the UK, to give you a better sense of hope that we can bend the curve on this. We can move from just talking about protecting nature to putting nature into recovery. So the first one I said, we need to make more space for nature. The good news is we're now starting to get commitments from world leaders to protect 30%, to make sure that we have 30% of our land and sea being set aside essentially for nature's recovery. And this, Sarah Jane was saying, this is a big year, 2021. This has already been committed to by a good number of world leaders, including the UK. And we're hoping that this year this is cemented, if you like, in a big international agreement to say we've got to have 30% of our land and sea into nature's recovery by 2030. This is a big thing that the Wildlife Trust has been pushing for, and we think we're going to get it agreed this year, which would be transformational. And that's the bare minimum that scientists say is required to start to actually heal nature, both in a way that's important for nature and also for tackling climate change. So that's something to watch for, and for us is a real kind of thing to hold in mind. You would be familiar, I'm sure, with those kind of targets around climate change, about the need to keep temperature rises to just 2 degrees, or of course then we tightened that to 1.5 degrees. What we've lacked in the nature space for a long time is an equivalent sort of target. But luckily now this 30 by 30 target is a good example of how we can do that, which is why it's front and center of campaigning by the Wildlife Trusts. We're going to make sure that we hold the UK government to account to make sure they deliver on that pledge to restore 30% of our land and sea by 2030. It's critically important. And this gives you a sense of what's needed to deliver that. At the moment, roughly around 10% across the UK, 13% in England, of our land is designated either site of special scientific interest or a local wildlife site. There's already a commitment to make some more space for nature, but actually we need to get to 30% of our land for nature. We need to see a dramatic increase in the space available. We currently estimate around really 10%, 5 to 10% of our land is in a good condition for nature, probably near 5%. If we're going to get to 30%, there's an awful lot that needs to be done in making that new space. So how are we going to do it? Well, as the Wildlife Trusts, the first thing to say is we're going to roll our sleeves up and try and make it happen as much as we can ourselves. At the Wildlife Trust, we actually have more nature reserves than McDonald's has got restaurants in the UK. My favourite statistic, 1,000 more. 1,000 more nature reserves than McDonald's has got restaurants in the UK. And we're very, very proud of them. But it's not enough. And in fact, we want to join the dots. We want to fill in the bits in between. And I love this photo because this is taken from one Wildlife Trust reserve. I think this is in Hampshire, looking across at another Wildlife Trust reserve. And what you see in between was a field, an agricultural field. And they managed to buy that field to fill in the gaps in between. So if you like, it's created one bigger reserve, but that's obviously much better for nature. And we're doing this right around the country now. We're buying bits of land that perhaps aren't very good for biodiversity at the moment, but we're putting them into recovery to create that bigger, better, more joined up landscape for nature's recovery that Sarah Jane was talking about. This is an example of where we're doing this in North Cambridgeshire, where we're actually wetting fenland soils again to try and restore fenlands for nature again. But I mean, we can do that with our current nature reserves. We also need something much more ambitious to do that. We need a nature recovery network to join up all these reserves and these protected sites that already exist. But we also just need to be taking land that is of low biodiversity value at the moment and putting that into recovery. And this is a site near where I live in Cambridge that, believe it or not, that's a local nature reserve. It's tiny, isn't it? You're seeing the whole thing there. It's really just a copse of trees. And it's actually very close to the outskirts of Cambridge. There you are. That's taken from within it, looking back at Annabrook's Hospital, which is on the southern side of Cambridge. And you look at that field there and you think, in reality, you know, that's not making a huge difference to food production in the UK in the scheme of things, but it would make such a difference to the people of that city if that was available for putting into recovery for nature. It'd make a huge difference to nature and a huge difference for the people of Cambridge. And so that's why last year we launched this concept of Wild Belt, which you might have heard. It's had quite a lot of media coverage recently about how we could designate areas like that and manage them for nature's recovery. And this would help deliver the nature recovery network that we need to do this. And it would create new space for people to be able to get out and enjoy nature, which we know is essential for people's physical and mental well-being. But it's not necessarily just those current nature sites. Actually, we need to do a much better job of recognizing how these kind of scrappy, messy bits around our towns and cities can also be very important for nature. So thinking, for example, of our roadside verges. I mean, actually, if we can manage them in a way where we're thinking of nature front and center. If we can allow our roadside verges to go wild, then in fact, actually, then we can start to bend the curve on improving the state of nature. And we would see that as kind of an example of wild belt as well. And just to say we can do this in a marine environment, it's often said that 50% of the UK's biodiversity is found in the marine environment, but a lot of it has been trawled and is in a really bad state. Actually, when you can properly designate and properly protect areas of the marine environment, you can restore the abundance of nature. And just last week, there was that brilliant announcement, I don't know if you heard, just off the coast near you, just off the Sussex coast actually, of banning bottom trawling just off the Sussex coast to create a space where actually nature can go into recovery in the marine environment as well. So we need to do that. We need to make more space for nature, but we also need to restore the abundance of nature. And one of the examples perhaps that you'll be familiar of the last few years is a huge decline in our bee populations. Again, this is tragic because bees are wonderful things. But again, given that we are dependent on them for our food because of the role they play in pollinators, in pollinating crops, it's not very smart. So we need to actually dramatically reduce the amount of pesticides and chemicals we're using on, say, invertebrates, on insect species, so that we can allow insects to recover in abundance. And the thing to bear in mind as well, when you actually, abundance in nature is one of the most important things out there, really. You know, for a long time, perhaps the conservation community has been guilty of talking about species extinctions and the problem with that. And that's a real problem. Of course, when species go extinct, that's a massive problem. But a long time before extinction, actually, just a decline in the abundance, the number of animals in a population reduces the job that that species is doing for us, the function they perform in the wider ecosystem. So restoring the abundance is very important. And again, bear in mind in the marine environment, if you look at, say, historical documents from 400 years ago, people would talk about how the North Sea, for example, was boiling in fish with cod that grew up to 3 meters long. Can you believe? We can't really imagine that now. And that, of course, is also a huge carbon store. All of that cod, you know, in fish, if fish are in that kind of abundance, that's a lot of carbon that's in the biosphere as opposed to in the atmosphere. So we need to work hard to allow the abundance of our wildlife species to recover, both to enable our ecosystems to function again, but also for climate reasons as well. And what do I mean when I say we need to get nature working again? Well, nature does so many brilliant things for us, and it does it for free, modulating climate, protecting us from flood risk, sucking carbon out the air, all of these things, soil fertility and so on. But when nature is broken, it's not doing those things. Let me give you an example here of our magnificent peatlands. You know, our peatlands are the equivalent of the UK's tropical rainforests, but sadly 80% of them are degraded. This is an example from Yorkshire, where you see degraded peatlands that have been dried out or drained, or sometimes dug up as well. And so they're not doing that job. And from a carbon point of view, that also means that they are emitting carbon to the atmosphere when they should be sucking carbon out the atmosphere and helping us fight climate change. So what Wildlife Trusts with peatland in their area are doing is trying to fix that. And here you see an example of how Yorkshire Wildlife Trust has been blocking up some of the old drainage ditches on peatlands and actually trying to restore peatlands again, to bend the curve on that. And where that's been working through this project, you actually see sphagnum moss growing again, this particular type of moss that sucks carbon out the air, locks it away, and enables that peatland to grow pretty much in perpetuity, and also holds water as well. So incredibly important to get nature working again. Sarah Jane was talking about nature-based solutions. I just thought I'd show this graphic, and I checked with Sarah Jane, she wasn't showing it beforehand, but there's so many different types of nature-based solutions. People often talk about woodland, and of course that's incredibly important, but grassland, peatland I was just talking about, wetlands, salt marshes, biomass carbon, seagrasses. There's a huge range of nature-based solutions that we have here in the UK. And at the Wildlife Trust, we estimate that actually if we can get serious about putting nature into recovery, around that 30% of our land and sea into recovery, if we can get really serious about that, that might be able to suck carbon out the air equivalent to 1/3 of the UK's current carbon emissions. That's a huge prize. So we really need to be getting on with it. And here you can see natural regeneration of woodland in Scotland through this approach. Here you can see regeneration and restoration of coastal wetlands in Essex. Right across the country, wildlife trusts are doing this, all part of this story of getting nature into recovery. And I can't give a talk and not also talk about how many wildlife trusts have or have plans to reintroduce missing species, not least beavers, which you might have heard about in Cornwall. And of course, again, yes, beavers look nice. They're kind of fun creatures to think about. They're fluffy and all of those kind of things, but they are brilliant ecosystem engineers as well, because they build their dams, they create these wetlands. They are keystone species that are so important for getting nature working again. And that's why we are putting so much importance in reintroducing beavers to the UK. And very simply, our wetlands need to be wet. That's all part of getting nature working again. These are our chalk streams. Many people don't realise that our chalk streams are internationally important. They're actually very rare globally, chalk streams, but we have a huge number of them here in the UK, but they're only working if they're wet. And that means we've got to make sure that we're not taking too much water out of the environment for our homes and businesses as well. Finally, another amazing example, this is Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, rewilding, if you like, a river. So this is the River Trent, would you believe, as it goes through Stoke-on-Trent. And for years, it was through this concrete channel that actually went under the football ground of Stoke City. But when Stoke City moved their football ground, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust got in and renaturalised the river channel. And this is creating new space for nature, getting that river working as nature intended again, right in the middle of Stoke, but of course creating an amazing new place for people to connect with nature as well. And right in the middle of cities, we're doing it. This is Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, which has submitted planning permission to rewild essentially the right centre of Nottingham. There's an awful, horrible shopping centre there at the moment, which is currently being demolished. And what Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust has said they want to do is replace it with this wild area right in the centre of town so that people have a place to go and we can start to restore the state of nature right in the centre of one of our big cities. And we're working with lots of other organisations to do this. We've got an action out at the moment, which is to call for legally binding targets in the Environment Bill, which is currently sort of going through Parliament. It's kind of paused at the moment, but it will come back later this year. And we're saying we need legally binding targets on future governments to make sure we're improving the state of nature and putting nature into recovery. These are all the organisations working together to do this. And this is critical because for years we've seen the state of nature declining in the UK and around the world. We now have an opportunity to make nature soar again and make sure we're restoring nature and bringing wildlife back, not just seeing it continue to decline. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Craig. There's so much to think about there, and I feel really proud to work for the Wildlife Trust with all that they're doing around the country. Ben, you're going to just show the poll for this one?
Yes, hopefully that is just launching now. So a really, really quick one, and then we will be having a short break. I think our break's been cut down a little bit, but that's okay. So this poll is just really quickly asking you all about what Craig was talking about. But were you aware before? Is the state of nature something that you knew about already? Is it something that you think you could change? Is it too late? Or do you think it's not really your responsibility? Is it up to governments? Or do you think all those fantastic things Craig was saying and showing examples of, are those local actions going to help make a difference?
That's good. Lots of people thinking local actions will make a difference.
Yeah, that's what we like to hear.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a quick break for Craig, mainly because he's going to be talking next. And so we've got a video to show you, but feel free, go and grab a drink, whatever you like, everybody. And then we'll start back in, let's see what time it is. Oh, maybe 5 minutes. We haven't got long. And we've got another video to show you after the break. Okay.
Decade or so, we are going to pass a number of tipping points. beyond which it's going to be very difficult to recover.
Reckless burning of fossil fuels, the destruction of the forests, pollution of the ocean. How is it possible that the most intellectual being that ever walked the planet is destroying its only home?
Since 1970s, we lost 60% of vertebrate species. If we look at insects, we lost 80%. As we lose species, what we also lose is the capacity of the natural systems to really provide the services that allow us to function.
One of the consequences of living in great cities, in great masses, is that we are cut off from that natural world. If you lose that sense of wonder, you've lost one of the most important things in your life.
The human race produces more waste than it really should.
We only recycle 9% of all plastic. That means that unless it's been burnt, every single piece of plastic ever made still exists on our planet.
The crisis of biodiversity with climate change, it's interlocked with many other global crises that we are seeing. Migration and climate refugees, political crisis, and perhaps a moral crisis.
We've stolen our children's future, we're still stealing it, and we must get together now.
When I first started the school strike for the climate, I never would have imagined that it was going to be this big. It's over 100,000 children from all around the world.
The consumer has to be the one that forces everyone's hand to say, I will not buy from you unless you have a sustainability policy and a clear transparency on the whole supply chain of the product that I'm buying.
We're now seeing a real increase in the number of collaborations and partnerships, creating extraordinary coalitions and setting ambitious targets to get us on the right path in line with what the science is telling us.
Employees have a responsibility to demand a better value system from corporations, and that's one way to pressure leaders to take a stand and say that they're going to be committed to the environment.
It just comes down to all leaders of all organizations recognizing far-reaching implications for how this can truly help to have an impact in the world.
Never compromise. What you're doing today will have an impact on the planet for thousands and thousands of years.
There has been no species that has been remotely clever or ingenious than Homo sapiens. Let us live up to that name. We need wisdom to actually find the solution and then courage to back it.
The things we have done in Guildford have been really great. We've really built a community, and I think that we've really made a difference.
The momentum that had been built in Guildford of all places, which it was kind of crazy considering it started with basically 2 of us and our families, grew to so many people.
This is the biggest crisis that we will face in our lifetimes. We all know in our hearts that the climate time bomb is ticking. We need to educate ourselves and rally ourselves and prepare ourselves for the biggest transformation since the end of World War II.
Youth Strike for Climate Guildford strongly urges you to pass these important motions this evening. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very, very much.
Guildford Borough Council have declared a climate emergency, which of course is good news, but now we need proper action, and this includes Guildford Borough Council really investing in renewable energy now in order to reach carbon neutrality by 2030, which is what they committed to when they declared a climate emergency.
Unfortunately, like a lot of other youth strike groups, we have had to put things on hold as a result of COVID-19. We have, however, tried to make the best out of the situation through the uses of social media and spreading awareness of various local government consultations in order for people to have their say on the matter.
We want Guildford Borough Council to make buses completely free for everybody in Guildford and better cycle lanes. And we also wanted to teach the future and incorporate the climate crisis into the curriculum.
Back in September of 2020, we also held a virtual strike asking people to send in photos of their strike signs so we could make a collage and put it on our own platforms.
Surrey Wildlife Trust has been protecting wildlife in England's most wooded county for decades, and we continue to champion nature with the same passion and dedication as our founders. Our supportive members and committed volunteers have been a fundamental part of our journey, and we've been inspiring people of all ages to love wildlife for years. From conservation and land management to education and research, everything we do aims to create a thriving natural landscape. In fact, all of our work is aimed at creating connections for wildlife and linking their habitats. Surrey has stunning, nationally important countryside and some of the most diverse wildlife in the country. But nature is in trouble. 1/3 of our species are already extinct or in decline. Roads and other developments form barriers between natural spaces, so wildlife is being confined to small, fragmented areas. To combat this, we're helping to create a nature recovery network so that wildlife communities can be more connected and move freely around the countryside. The reserves we care for are safe havens for wildlife, but they only represent 5% of the land in Surrey. So we're working with partners to share our knowledge and skills to help create a more connected landscape. Our volunteer-led river search teams assess and restore stretches of river to help nature thrive. Our hedgerow heroes help monitor, restore, and protect the hedgerows that provide living green corridors between different habitats. As a conservation organisation, science is at the heart of everything we do. Our ecology services and planning teams help businesses and new developments reduce their impact on wildlife. Our mission is clear. Surrey Wildlife Trust is committed to restoring nature across the county and inspiring people to value and take action for wildlife. You can play a part too. If you have a garden, it can become part of a wider network, linking urban green spaces with nature reserves and the countryside. Put up a bird box, grow wildlife-friendly shrubs, and plant flowers for bees. You can also support us by volunteering, joining as a member, making a donation, or offering your corporate support. There's still a lot to do, but together we can protect wildlife in Surrey for generations to come.
Okay, welcome back everybody. Hope you can hear me. Right, so part 2, we're going to be talking about the actions that you could be taking. You've heard all about the issues. I hope you saw some of those videos, but I'm going to hand straight back over to Craig to talk about some top tips for campaigning. Okay, over to you, Craig.
Great, thanks, Louise. Well, there's so many things to say here, and I just want to talk a little bit about developing those successful campaign strategies. I mean, you guys, young people, have really shown over the last few years that you're fabulous at doing just that, developing campaign strategies. But there's a few kind of things that I've learned in my career that are kind of worth sharing about thinking about how to really make sure a campaign delivers the impact and the real world change that you want it to. The first, this might seem a slightly odd thing to do, is just to throw up a dictionary definition of a campaign. But I always find this is a really useful thing to talk to, actually, because sometimes even a lot of people that have done a lot of campaigning, it's kind of easy to forget some of the aspects of this. And so what do I mean there? Well, the definition is of a series of coordinated events. It's not just one thing. So this is what I'd say campaigning is, how it's different from advocacy. You can imagine that advocacy might be, you decide something needs changed, you go straight to a decision maker, you advocate a position, and then that's it. But a campaign is recognizing that it's going to require a lot more change for that to happen. And maybe the way to bring about that change is not to go straight to the decision maker, but to bring about a big shift in society or the way people think about things, to then build public pressure and a series of events that ultimately lead to a change in circumstances that means you can win a campaign. That's very important. So a series of coordinated activities and designed to achieve a social, political, commercial goal. Notice that it's a single goal there, it's not goals. And one of the times I've often seen when campaigns struggle, it's when they try and list too many things that they want it to do. The most successful campaigns are those that are focused around a single thing. Even if actually to deliver that, you have to do lots of things below that. So think of in the 1970s, 1980s, the famous Save the Whales campaign. Everyone knew what it was. Over the last few years, the campaign I was involved was stopping fracking. Everyone knew what it meant. Saving the bees, people knows what it meant. You know, you've got to be really clear and capture people's imagination that there's this kind of one thing for a campaign. And if actually you make it too complicated, then people won't, and it's too many issues in there, people won't get it. Often, however, the challenge on this is that we're trying to often work on complicated issues. And so it's not to deny the complexity, it's just that, you know, your job as someone that's trying to campaign as an activist or whatever is to make it simple, actually. So you might be all over the complexity. It's not to kind of present all that complexity to everyone else. And so this is an example about how you can map complicated issues to try and identify what is the real kind of clear way through. If you're wondering what this is a influence map that Greenpeace did for their palm oil campaign about 10 years ago. And they're mapping on there all the companies, all the people involved, all the key players, to just try and map out on one big piece of paper, or in this case, a spreadsheet, as it were, to try and map out actually who are the key players and how can they be influenced, how they relate to each other. And that's what actually helped Greenpeace then develop what ended up being the palm oil campaign. Incredibly important. In developing those strategies, I would say there's a bunch of things that are really important to nail before you're sort of running out there, and just to be clear about. So one is that campaign objective. What precisely is it that you're trying to change, trying to achieve, and by when? That's incredibly important. And you might have a big mission, a big vision, you know, something like stopping climate change or whatever. Actually, that's absolutely good. Of course, things are nested like that. I'll come onto that in a little moment. But actually breaking it down into a short-term win that you can say, this is the thing we want to win in the next year, but you can see how that relates to the big mission, is really important to be able to do that. Who are your campaign targets? So who is it you're trying to change or influence? Who are the decision makers? Who's the change you want? It might be, you might sort of say, in your school, you want to bring about a sort of change on policy on something in your school or in your university or whatever, but precisely who is it that is able to make the decision on that? Is it one of the teachers? Is it the governors or whatever? And working through that in a local authority, is it the councillors or is it the actual officials that you want to try and influence? Who are your potential allies? Who are the people that might come on side? And sometimes actually having surprising allies is a really good thing. Well, often at the Wildlife Trust, we will try and work with other organisations that might surprise people, that, you know, you'd have a wildlife organisation and perhaps a mental health organisation working together to make the same case about something. And those potential, having a range of allies is really, really important. But also to identify, very important to identify who are your possible opponents, who are the people that might disagree with you. And can you preempt almost what their arguments will be? Can you go and speak to them and try and understand that more and see if they are really strong views, or it's based on a misunderstanding, or actually are they going to try and block you all the way? And do you have to try and think through what are the strategies for dealing with that? What about timing and timelines? You know, it's very good to map out over the course of a year, say, what are the events that are going to be happening and how can you use them to help your campaign? What are the kind of key hooks and so on? I can tell you in my campaigning career, of course, there's kind of big issues like G7 summits, big UN summits, general elections, whatever you like, that are going to be very relevant to opportunities to try and build support for around a campaign. But there's also things that happen every year, like Christmas or summer and spring and things like that. These are all opportunities to think that's a chance to get a message across in a particular way. And You don't have to say everything all at one point in time. It's better to build your message across a year and have a very clear message almost like in each month, and build the narrative as a whole across the year rather than try and say something at every moment. And what's the coordination you need? I mean, unless you're doing this all on yourself, if you're doing it as a team of you or as a movement of people, then you need to make sure there's coordination. You know, the meetings, the messages, the tech that you're going to use, you know, what are the platforms you're going to use to share information, all of those kind of things, thinking about how you're just going to work together to do that. And finally, of course, last but very definitely not least, your target audiences. So who are the people, yes, you need to influence, but who are the audiences you need to reach to influence those people as well? The knock-on effect, incredibly important. To give you an idea just how we're sort of clustered things in the Wildlife Trust at the moment, we have a big vision of a wilder future. That's what we want. That's the simplest way to summarize it. We want a wilder future here in the UK. And we've got a kind of consistent idea of that vision and kind of what that looks like. But that's a big, big thing. You know, we can't just suddenly say, this thing that's going to happen this year will create the wilder future that we want. It's going to be hundreds and hundreds of steps that are required to deliver that. So we've got to break it down to something that's a bit more short term, but will get us on the way. And that's why we focused around, for example, this focus of trying to get 30% of our land and sea into nature's recovery by 2030. The good thing about that, you notice that's very measurable. I mean, world leaders have signed up to it now, but our job now is to absolutely make sure we deliver that in the UK. And we will be able to measure, have we succeeded or failed in doing that? Have our political leaders succeeded or failed in doing that? Can everyone play their part to be part of trying to get 30% of our land and sea for nature by 2030? You can see that's something more tangible and easier to measure than a wilder future. But a wilder future is still right. You know, you want that long term. So wilder future is not wrong, but this one breaks it down a little bit more into something you can measure. But even then, 30 by 30, that all sounds very nice, but it's 9 years off. I mean, are we just going to go campaign like mad and we're not going to know for 9 years whether it succeeded or failed? No, we're going to break it down, which is why then, for example, we've got this near-term campaign, if you like, for Wild Belt, because we think a concept like Wild Belt, making new space for nature, being able to designate land that is currently of low biodiversity value and manage it in such a way that it will create new space for nature. Actually, we're going to need that sooner to have any chance of getting to 2030. It's just one of the many measures we're going to need for that. And we think this is one, you know, we've got a lot of support from within government for this at the moment, I'm delighted to say. And so we think this is hopefully something we might win a commitment on in the next year or so. And we feel pretty confident about that. And so that means that's one of the stepping stones to getting to 2030. So breaking it down into these stepping stones and seeing how they're all nestled will be very important. The same will be true on, say, climate campaigning on climate change. Trying to fix the climate is a pretty big goal, but actually breaking it down into, well, where do you want to get to on renewable energy? Where do you want to get to on divestment? Where do you want to get to on those issues in your local area is a critical point to see how these things are all nested. And it might sound odd, perhaps, for me to sort of finish up a bit tonight in thinking, quoting Aristotle from thousands of years ago. But I think this is absolutely, it's amazing how this is true now, as true as it's ever been. Aristotle worked out that when you're trying to convince people of a point of view, you need what he called 3 types of rhetorical proof. What he called was ethos, which is the character and credibility of the person speaking. Pathos, emotional appeals, storytelling, and logos, use of reasoning, facts, and so on. What I find funny is a lot of campaigners leap straight to the logos. They try and make sure their facts are right and they can get their points across. And that's needed. You always need the facts on your side. You need the argument on your side. But don't underestimate how important pathos is, making sure you've got good stories that illustrate it, and indeed ethos, the credibility of the person speaking. And it's sometimes important to recognize that to win a campaign, you need a lot of different voices to make the point as to why something is needed. Finally, if you're really interested in how campaigns are changing, the way people campaign these days are changing, this is a fantastic report. You can find it online. It's called Network Change. And it's really recognizing that over the last decade or so, particularly in the age of social media, if you look at the campaigns that have been really successful, like Black Lives Matter and indeed the school strikes and so on, they are a model of what's called network change, where you have a big overarching goal and framing about how to deliver a particular big change campaign. But guess what? Then there's a huge amount of flexibility at a local level about how to interpret and deliver that. And that's one of the reasons I was so keen to take this job at the Wildlife Trust, because I believe passionately to achieve really big, bold change, you need to be joined up on what you're trying to achieve at the kind of local, at the global level, national level, but then actually you've got to be really responsive at a local level about how you go ahead and achieve it, because it's always local communities that deliver the really big change, and people should feel empowered to do that. There's an old phrase, think global, act local. And funny enough, I think it's more true now than ever before. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Craig. That's brilliant to have all your experience on campaigning there. Okay, so now we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to quickly hand over to Claire Coutinho, who is MP for Surrey East, who is going to be talking to us about lobbying. Claire, are you there? Would you be able to unmute and
I think the host is unmuting me and hang on. Oh, there we go. Hello.
Welcome. I'm just going to close down now.
Great. Well, I'll kick off then. My name's Claire. I was elected in 2019 to be the MP for East Surrey. Before that, I was a special advisor. So some of you may know cabinet ministers get usually 2 special advisors to work on political things for them. And I advise ministers on legislation and in the Treasury. And before that, I worked for about 5 years in public policy on social justice issues. So I've really seen the whole spectrum of how to lobby an MP, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. And first, I would just say that the environment is a brilliant issue to be working on, and as well as biodiversity and wildlife as well, because not only is it a huge priority of this government, but this year in particular, as you will have heard mentioned, we have COP26, the 26th UN Climate Change Conference, and we also are hosting the G7. So that's 2 brilliant forums where we're gathering world leaders, where the environmental issues which will be at the heart. So it's a really good time to be lobbying your MP ahead of these events. But more broadly, I just wanted to sort of bring up an example of how effective it can be. So the example I was going to talk about was the Break the Bag habit, which was a campaign in 2015, which was successful in changing the way that we've used plastic bags, which means that I think 15 billion plastic bags have been taken out of circulation because of a successful lobbying effort. So lobbying can be done in person, by email or letter, on social media, and I'm going to give you my top tips on how to be effective. So the first thing I'm going to start by saying is that last year, me and my team got 12,000 pieces of correspondence. So to give you some idea, if you divide that over the working days that you have in the year, that's about 45 pieces of correspondence a day with people raising issues with us that we have to try and deal with. And that's on top of the rest of your job, which is doing visits, local campaigns, local events, scrutinizing legislation, speaking about your national issues. And I'm a PPS to the Treasury, so I have all of that kind of thing as well. So just to say that an MP's time is very stretched. So you really need to land your correspondence when you send it to them. And I would say the things that work for me would be letter or email. Most MPs just don't have time to police all of their social media. So while it might feel a really good way to get in contact with them, I would just say we're not Amazon, we don't have huge teams. And if you want a guaranteed response, the best way to do that is usually to email them or write to them at the House of Commons address or their MP parliamentary address. And the things that I would explain in that correspondence is firstly, do some research on the MP. Is there a particular relevance to them? Do they sit on a select committee? You can use Hansard to see if they've ever spoken about the topic you want to raise with them before. You could see whether there's a particular local relevance that you think might be effective in catching their attention. And usually that is one of the best ways to catch an MP's attention, to say this is a massive issue here and you need to do something about it. Secondly, I would explain the relevance to you. It's much more compelling when someone can tell you a personalized reason of why they care about this issue and why it's really important to them. Third, I would talk about the evidence. So what evidence have you gathered? Are you working with experts? Do you have a particular piece of research? Why is the policy or the action that you want that MP to take the right one? I would explain some of that in detail. And that would be much more compelling than a sort of, I feel passionately about this, but I don't really know what it is I want you to look at. And lastly, I would say be specific in your ask. So what do you want your MP to do? You can speak to us at surgery. So every 2 weeks, I have a telephone surgery now. It used to be in person, obviously, because of the pandemics now on the phone. But that means I can give you a slot of 10 to 15 minutes of my time where you can speak to me personally about your issue to press the case. You can ask us to hold debates. You can ask us to raise things with departments or ministers. You could ask us to visit a local example of the thing that you want to show us. And you can ask us to communicate to residents. After all, we know with the environment, so many of these things are about getting individuals to change the personal choices that they're making, whether it's fast fashion or food waste or using public transport. You might want to use our platform to ask our residents to do something that you think is particularly important for your cause. So overall, I would say personal, precise correspondence is going to get you the best answer. Trying to find a local reason for them to be involved and trying to sort of grab their attention with detail, with evidence, and possibly getting in front of them via either a visit or at a surgery. And to give you some examples of the things that have happened to me locally in my year that I've been here, one would be actually wild belts. I had a very passionate activist talk to me about wild belts. And one of the reasons they picked me out to talk to me about that is actually they weren't a constituent, but they knew that in East Surrey, I have one of the highest green belt areas in the country. So they thought it would be a really good fit and it would be something which would be of interest to me, which it was. And actually, that's how I met Craig for the first time, because I then went to seek him out to ask for more information. And I'm hoping to have a Westminster Hall debate on that very issue this year. And that started with someone talking to me about the issue and putting all the evidence in front of me why this thing was important. Secondly, the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. It was actually the head of the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty who got in contact with me to say, we really need to get the boundary review. And the thing that they did, which was very successful, is they asked me specifically to write to the department, which was DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, which they wanted them to do the review. They asked me to try and gather as many MPs as I could to write to the department to press to get this boundary reviewed, which I then went off and did, and they then committed to us to be able to review and protect the boundary, which is going to be really important for protecting that space that we all enjoy. And a recent example about, I think it was in the last couple of weeks actually, I had a constituent who booked in a surgery slot to speak to me, to talk to me about littering. And we agreed to do a litter pick so that local residents could get involved. And I always think it's quite good if people see you out in high vis when they're driving past, they might think twice about throwing stuff out their car, for example. But he also specifically asked me to write to a variety of companies where there's a high incidence of their products being littered. So for example, McDonald's is one of them, to ask them what they're doing in terms of trying to stop people from throwing their products out of their car windows. So these are just some kind of examples where people came to me with specific or local issues, which have made me sit up and take notice and get involved. And the next thing I just wanted to talk a little bit about is how you can best use Parliament, or how you can get your MP to use Parliament. And the first thing I would say that is really important there is trying to get upstream of legislation. So usually if you're coming to an MP on the eve of a vote to say, can you vote this way or that way, you're probably a bit too late because their mind will already be made up. by far the best thing to do is to try and get ahead of that legislation, even coming to Parliament when it's in the construction mode, and try and get them at that point to be lobbying government to say, actually, we know we've got this bill coming. We think it's really critical that X, Y, or Z is in it. And the way that you can do that is watching the Queen's speech is a really good example. You can look at the parliamentary website, which will tell you which bills are upcoming and what stages they are at. And you can really try and get ahead of this legislation coming in. So an example, you can look at which white papers and green papers are out, so you know that things are coming later down the line. So an example at the moment, I would say for wild belts, is that we know that this planning legislation is going to be coming forward to Parliament. And that would be an example where you could think, oh, I know I've got some planning legislation coming to Parliament. There'll be a possibility for MPs to amend that to include a designation on wild belts. So what I'll do is at this moment in time, try and get my MP to talk to government about including it, this piece of legislation that I want in that bill. The other thing I would say is to look outside of legislation as well in terms of what MPs can do to raise the profile of your campaign. So one of the things that we can do is we can host different types of debates. So we can host Westminster Hall debates, backbench debates, adjournment debates. There's actually a real range of ways that we can get parliamentary time to talk about your issue. So you can ask us to do that. You can also ask us to raise things to ministers in departmental questions. So every day we have an hour when a different department will take questions from MPs. So you can ask us to try and raise your issue in that. There's also other sort of parliamentary moments like statements and UQs where, again, you can try and get us to get your issue in front of ministers on the record. And that's something which I think is also a really useful way of you trying to raise the profile of your campaign in Parliament, which is not necessarily the bill amendment legislation route, which I think everyone sort of instantly thinks of. And lastly, obviously, you know, all MPs do media, they use social media. We have a platform as well. You might want to ask us to lend our platform to you to promote whatever issue it is you want to get to the top of the local agenda. So those are sort of my top tips on how to best use your MP and how to get their attention to make sure that your cause can be at the top of the list.
Wow, thank you so much, Claire. That's fantastic. Some great advice there. And I hope you can stay around for a while because lots of questions have been coming in and we'd love to ask you a few questions a little bit later on, just after 8. Ben has got a poll, which I'm going to put up now.
Yeah, so just really quickly, guys, because we have to move on to the next speakers. Obviously, Claire gave some fantastic advice there, but we were just wondering if you've ever actually tried to do this before. Has it worked for you? Did you even know you could? So just vote really quickly there. And then remember, put your proper questions in the Q&A for Claire and for Craig and any of the other speakers so we can ask them all at the end in the panel. And then I'll hand back to Lou to move on to our next speaker.
Yeah, just really interesting results there that not many people knew that they could contact their local MP. So really great that you came on here, Claire, to tell them that they could. So, okay, next speaker, I'm going to hand over to Katy Fielding, Hedgerow Heritage Conservation Officer, who is going to tell you all about hedgerows.
Hello, hi everyone. So I'm going to take you on a really quick talk about the wonderful world of hedgerows and what they can do and what they are doing in the help to fight against climate change and biodiversity loss. So the big question, why care about hedgerows? Well, in a nutshell, they are incredible habitat and so much wildlife thrives and relies on them. And they create these amazing corridors through our countryside, our parklands, our green spaces, and even our gardens, helping to link different habitat types. Not only are they doing lots for our wildlife and our countryside, but they also provide fantastic ecosystem services for us, and they're also helping to capture lots of carbon. So, amazing habitat, it's quite a big statement, but there aren't that many habitats in the UK that can boast over 500 plant species, 60 species of nesting birds, many hundreds, if not thousands, of different invertebrate species, And almost all of our native mammals have been recorded as being supported by or living in and around hedgerows, which is pretty good really for a habitat type in the UK. So just some of that wildlife that we're talking about. So these are just some of my pictures, although I have to confess I didn't take the one in the bottom right. Sadly, all of the little mammals that I have seen in and around hedgerows have got away from me far too quickly before I've taken photos. But you've got, if you look in the top left there, you've got a male stag beetle. And he really benefits from the base of a hedge and that deadwood and leaf litter at the bottom. A lot of our different ladybird species really benefit from hedgerows, this being a little 7 spot, and over 20 species of butterfly have been found breeding in hedgerows. And this is a gorgeous white admiral on bramble. And then some more species that you might not necessarily think of. So even our reptile species that you wouldn't necessarily instantly think as benefiting from hedgerows do use them as those dispersal corridors. And of course, birds, we all see lots of birds in hedgerows. Now, I have lots of different pictures of birds, but I thought that this slightly wet and bedraggled juvenile wood pigeon, who's clearly only recently been left by his parents to fend for himself, was benefiting most from the hedgerow as compared to all my other pictures of birds. He definitely needed that hedgerow the most that day. So I feel like the word and the term corridors, when we're talking about hedgerows and different spaces, is used a lot, whether that's a green corridor, a wildlife corridor. And I just wanted to tell you that there's so much more to a corridor as well and explain a little bit more about it. So obviously they allow our wildlife safe passage through our countryside, parks, gardens. If you have a hedgerow there, I can guarantee that some wildlife is benefiting from it. And they really help to prevent populations from becoming isolated. So if there is a small population somewhere, they need to be able to reach other populations and link up. If they don't, then they can become very isolated, which can lead them to become vulnerable. And sadly, sometimes that can lead to local extinctions. So that linking capacity of hedgerows is really important. What's also really important about this corridor function that hedgerows have is that they allow species to spread out. You know, you've heard so much this evening about how species are declining and going extinct locally. When species are reducing in numbers, their population size and areas that they inhabit shrink. And if we want to see wildlife return, then they need to be able to expand and occupy those areas that they've gone extinct in at the moment. And hedgerows have a massive part to play in being able to aid that expansion back into our countryside. So obviously those are two really big, hard-hitting kind of functions of corridors, but also they're really there for the day-to-day as well. So the commuting routes. So as dormice, bats, bees, just to name a few, are going out on their daily or nightly activities, foraging, hunting for food, gathering pollen, they're going to use hedgerows to navigate through the landscape and find their favourite places to gather those things and then come back to the roost or the nest. So I just wanted to give a couple of specific examples around a couple of our really iconic species. And I just couldn't not talk about the hazel dormouse, as it is one of our most iconic and yet threatened hedgerow species. Now, dormice are really reliant on hedgerows because of that corridor function that they fill. So obviously they are linking those small copses, maybe a hazel copse that can't support a viable population of dormice on its own. They need to be able to get out into different habitat types, different plants, and gather different food types. If there wasn't that linking capacity, then again, that population can become small and isolated, which is exactly what we don't want. Dormice are known as being arboreal, so if they can avoid it, they really don't want to go on the ground. So even small gaps in a hedgerow can be seen as a massive obstacle. So it's so key that we have continuous lines, linear features that can get around it. Not only are they valuable though to the dormice as that linking capacity and that corridor function that hedgerows fill, hedgerows are a fantastic habitat type for hazel dormice in their own right as well. And there's actually a study done by the Royal Holloway London, which showed that there was a higher proportion of breeding dormice in a hedgerow as a woodland. So they're supporting the same numbers. So hedgerows are so valuable even in their own right as a habitat and a breeding site for those dormice. So obviously, if we're losing our hedgerows, they're not only losing their corridors, they're also losing their habitat. So we have to protect them for this species, as well as so many others. And then I thought it would be really interesting just to go from sort of a ground dwelling species, albeit one that doesn't want to touch the ground, to a species that's flying around. And equally, even though they're fulfilling a slightly different function, hedgerows are so important to bats. So bats are really reliant on linear features in the countryside, whether that's hedgerows, woodland edges, and even streams and rivers, because they need these features for their echolocation to bounce off. So obviously echolocation is where they're putting that high-pitched frequency out into the countryside, and how it bounces back to them off different objects is how they build up that picture around them. So a network of well-connected hedgerows and other linear features within a landscape allow many species of bat to extend their foraging range and even their roosting capacity, and really helps them to form those commuting routes and aids their navigation. And without those, they can become lost and disorientated, especially depending on the species. Not only are they using them for getting around, but they also form fantastic shelter and roosting opportunities. So if a bat goes off and he goes a little bit far one night and he can't make it back to the main roost, he may just haul up in a hedgerow overnight and use that as shelter. It may be that it's really bad weather or he's not been able to find enough food. Hedgerows give these animals, as well as so many others, that opportunity to shelter and roost overnight. And as I mentioned before, it's home to not only hundreds, but possibly thousands of different invertebrate species. And that's what bats are eating all night long. So hedgerows are also a fantastic food source for them. So I've briefly talked a little bit about all those benefits to wildlife, but it's not just wildlife that are benefiting from hedgerows, it's us, it really is. And you can see from that definition of what ecosystem services mean. It's making human life both possible and worth living. And there's all kinds of ecosystem services that we're benefiting from hedgerows, from increasing and protecting our water quality, which I feel like is just growing in understanding. And we're starting to really know we've got to look after our streams and our rivers, and we need to prevent those nutrients and other pollution reaching water bodies. And hedgerows are really good at helping to prevent that. From a farming perspective, hedgerows are really good protection from wind, water, and soil erosion, helping to protect those crops, which is going to get food on our plates we've grown in this country. Building on that farming kind of theme, they also provide fantastic pollination services. So it's actually a growing body of evidence that hedges enhance population size and diversity of pollinators. You know, even just before we were looking at those corridors and bees are using them as commuting routes, we need those around our farming environment as well to help boost those populations and help them get around as well. And maybe the most interesting ecosystem service from my perspective is what they're doing in our urban centres and really changing how we think about green infrastructure. So there's been a study done, in fact, quite a lot of studies now, that have found that low-lying continuous hedges are actually better at protecting us from pollution than single planted trees in our urban spaces. They're able to filter out even heavy metals, and they're obviously putting oxygen out and taking carbon dioxide in. So they're incredibly valuable. So ecosystem services are generally thought to fall into four main types. You've got supporting services, regulating services, provisioning services, and also cultural services. And hedgerows are providing some of these, if not all of them, in one way or another. But and the last thing I'll say about ecosystem services is those cultural services, and that societal appreciation of nature. The year we've just had, I feel like it's never been clearer to most of us just how important that is, and hedgerows can be a big part of that, especially where space is really limited. And the final thing I will say about hedgerows is that they are brilliant at capturing carbon. At the end of the day, hedgerows are made up of lots of trees, and we know that trees are great at catching carbon. And it's found from the Sustainable Farming Initiative that of the hedgerows we already have in England, they're helping to store 9 million tonnes of carbon. But obviously this figure is often overlooked, as well as the role that hedgerows can play. But just imagine if we protected our existing hedgerows a little bit better. We help to manage them better, get them into better condition, how much better that would be for the wildlife that we have improve those ecosystem services, and even start to plant new ones and really connect up the landscape and start to build towards that 30% that you've been hearing about from Craig. Imagine how much carbon we could be capturing then and really making big steps towards those goals we have. So that's everything from me. Hopefully you now know a little bit more about Hedgerows and the fantastic role they're playing and they're doing out there. And you've got an idea about a more tangible and local solution and something that you guys can actually get involved with, whether that's surveying hedgerows, planting them, or even learning to hedge lay and take on some more of that management opportunities. And I know that after this, you're going to be sent loads of information, including a fantastic app where you can get out and start surveying all the hedgerows in your local areas and even calculate how much carbon they're capturing. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Katie. I can see everyone's busy voting away in the poll. Lots of people saying that they didn't know all those amazing things about hedgerows, which is great. So you definitely taught people stuff today. We've got lots of people saying they're interested in further involvement with hedgerows. Lots of people saying they're happy for you to send them an email. So guys, if you have voted, you want to find out more and you're happy for Katie to give you a shout over email and help you get involved, please tick that box as well so we can send you some interesting emails later on. Lots of lovely comments in the chat as well. People just saying you're really cool, Katie, which is always nice to hear.
I don't hear that very often, so that's great. Thanks. I love, Katie, that you've made hedgerows cool again. So brilliant. Right, so our last speaker tonight before we go over to questions is Stephanie Todd. So I'm going to hand over to Sustainable Stephanie to talk to you now.
Hi there, everyone. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, we just can't see you yet, Steph. I'm not sure your camera's on.
All right, it's coming up. It says the host has stopped me starting my video. Great, there we go. Are you able to see me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Hi there, everyone. Really pleased to meet all of you virtually. It's such a shame we can't do these events in person, but I think everyone's done such a fab job of bringing these presentations to life virtually. So just very briefly, a little bit about me. So my name is Stephanie Todd, otherwise known as Sustainable Stephanie. I'm a sustainability manager at Kingston University. And I do that full time. In my spare time, I guess you would consider me a sustainability influencer. I use platforms like Instagram to communicate big issues like climate change and try and break it down in simple, easy ways and bite-sized nuggets of information. And I've put in there that I studied geography, environmental studies and archaeology at A-level because I know there's loads of students on the call, and I went on to study environmental sciences at Southampton University. So if you've got any questions around studying, please don't hesitate to contact me after the presentation. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my sustainability journey, and I've had some time to reflect on how I felt when I was a student. So I've been in the sustainability profession now for about 5 years, and I graduated in 2015. So I cast my mind back to when I was a student, and I put a few words on the screen here as to how I felt when I was at college and when I was at university. And maybe some of these words resonate with you today on the call. I felt powerless. I felt when I was a student that I didn't really know enough, and because I didn't know everything, I couldn't talk about these issues. I actually felt quite alone at points as well. I didn't really see any of my friends that were talking about these issues. And I think thankfully, due to things like the youth strikes and the climate strikes, this is changing. But at that period in my life, I did feel quite alone. I also felt frustrated as well. I was really annoyed that there were large corporations that were polluting our planet, that beautiful blue marble that we saw in Craig's presentation. And I felt frustrated that these companies were polluting our beautiful planet, and I didn't know how I could make a difference. I thought that my actions were too small to make a difference, and it was completely out of my hands. And you'll understand, if you've felt any of these emotions before, how difficult it can be when you're in that scenario. I thought the only way for me to actually make a difference in the world was for me to actually get into one of these big organizations as a sustainability manager and make a difference from the inside. And I'm really pleased that I did that. I focused all my efforts on my career ambitions, which is great. And I would always encourage everyone to look into careers in the environment, sustainability and conservation profession, because there is so much out there and it is a growing industry as well. But where I focused so much on my career goals, actually, I failed to realise the impact that my personal footprint was having on the planet. And I distinctly remember I had this almost penny drop moment when I was in my first ever meeting in my new job. And I sat down and all of the conversations were around the customer. What does the customer want? You know, how are we going to keep the customer happy? And it sounds very, very simple, but I realized that I was a customer and I hadn't really made that connection. I realized that actually every pound I was spending, I was casting a vote for the world that I wanted to be in. And I had a look at myself and I realized I was living an incredibly unsustainable life. I was going on holidays left, right and center, hopping on planes, purchasing clothes all the time from fast fashion outlets. I had ASOS deliveries coming through my door every other day. It was terrible. And I had a bit of time to look at my own behaviors. And I thought, you know what, if I'm doing this as a recent environment graduate, then I need to change that and I need to communicate that change with people. So after that revelation, and maybe some of you have had that penny drop moment yourselves, it may even be on this presentation today and this fascinating workshop we've been in, I decided to start thinking about my behaviours and I started to change them. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And when I did that, actually, all of these things on the screen here, they changed. All of a sudden, I felt empowered. I realized that actually I didn't have to be an expert in everything. You don't need a degree in environmental sciences to know that climate change is impacting our planet right now, and we have to take action on it. I also felt really unified. So when I set up my Instagram profile to talk about these issues, I came across loads of other like-minded people that felt exactly the same. And that made me feel really motivated instead of frustrated. It made me realize that actually I can change my own behaviors. That's one thing that I can control. You know, I may not be able to control the likes of BP directly, but what I can do is look at my own behaviors. And actually that made me feel really hopeful. It made me realize that those small actions collectively, they add up to something huge. So what did I do next after this penny drop moment? Well, I said I set up my Instagram account, and that's something I did back in 2017 now. So I've been doing it for quite a while. And the title of this presentation is all around living sustainably. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do to live a sustainable lifestyle. It's an incredibly personal journey. One thing that I did is that I looked at all of the products that I was purchasing. So when something ran out, I had a look at it and I thought, how, you know, is this sustainable? You know, what's the environmental credentials of this product that I'm using? And then when it finished, I looked for something that was more sustainable. Now that takes a lot of time. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's something that has been really motivating for me. So every week I try to make a sustainable swap. I call it Sustainable Swap Sunday, and then I will share that with my followers. So I've put a little infographic here of some things that you can do if you want to live a more sustainable lifestyle. So incorporating more plant-based meals into your diet, really looking at your recycling. I know it's second nature for most of us, but actually there's some things that we're recycling that we shouldn't be. Composting at home, cycling wherever you can, all of these things that we do really do make a difference. And I do appreciate that some of you that are listening today, maybe your mum or your dad or your housemates are the ones that are directly responsible for these choices. So when it comes to maybe doing the weekly food shop, that may be something you're not doing. However, you can still influence your parents perhaps to start incorporating some more sustainable products where they can and where you can into your routine. And just a few things to add to that as well is we need to recognise that not everybody can access all of these things equally. So for example, things like organic veg, that's something I buy. I'm very privileged to be able to afford it, but not everyone can. However, there are things that we can do that are completely free. For example, like we've heard from Claire, writing to your MP, contacting your MP. Actually, that is a sustainable thing you can do as part of your life. It doesn't have to be a product. And arguably, that's probably more impactful than switching to a plastic-free shampoo, for example. So there's lots that we can do as part of our lifestyle. There's no set way of going about it. You could do what I did if you wanted. You could target a particular room in the house, like the kitchen, and start focusing on your products there. It really is entirely up to you, but just take it slowly, take your time with it. It needs to be sustainable for you as well as for the planet. And also, I would say as well, just be mindful that we're set up in an inherently unsustainable society. So it's not always easy to make these swaps. So moving on very quickly to sustainability in terms of communication and social media. So we consume so much of our information through social media, and it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I think this links on quite nicely from Craig's talk actually on campaigns. So I'm just going to speak very briefly as to what I've learned over this period of me developing my platform. I'm by no means a social media guru, I'm just putting it out there, but these are the few tips that I've picked up. So when I created my profile, I created a dedicated account. Now this is really good because it's an easy way for people to find you because you've got sustainability in your name. However, one thing that has come with that I found is that I've ended up almost in a bit of an echo chamber where I just hear from people about sustainability, and actually using your own existing platform is a great way to target your existing friends, your existing followers that maybe aren't that interested in sustainability. They are the ones that we want to get in touch with and get motivated about sustainability. Hold companies' account on Twitter. If you see something wrapped in plastic that already has its natural packaging, take a picture of it and call it out. I'd also say as well, use software like Canva. I'll just come onto this page here, which is a post I put together all about being plant-based. And actually, do you have to be 100% plant-based to live a sustainable lifestyle and have a sustainable diet? Well, Canva is a great tool. This is a free resource for you to make amazing graphics. You don't need to be a graphic designer. And all of a sudden that brings these data, these big reports to life. So this post here is all about how actually can we achieve net zero emissions by 2050 in the UK. What does that mean for our diets? A lot of people say we need to cut down on our meat and dairy, but actually how much do we need to cut down? Well, according to the UK Climate Change Committee, really what we need to be working towards is a reduction of 35% by 2050 if we're going to achieve net zero by 2050. And arguably that target of net zero should be sooner. So this is just a little example of how you can use tools like Canva, how you can use Instagram to bring these statistics to life to get people engaged in them. And then moving on to my final bit of the presentation, this is my ask to you. So whenever I do these Q&As, I always get a question, Steph, what is the one thing that I should do that right now after this talk that's sustainable? Well, I've preempted that question and I've given you 4 things that you can do after this presentation to take away to make a difference. So at the beginning, the first poll we had, 41% of you said that there is no support from schools and organisations in making a change on sustainability and climate action. Well, what I would like you to do is speak to your school, your college or university, find out what they're doing to support the wider sustainability agenda. Speaking as a sustainability manager, when I have an email come through from a student saying, I care about sustainability, what are we doing? Not only does it give me ammunition and a reason to continue with my with all of my projects, but it makes me smile. So find out what's happening. If there isn't anything happening, check out this charity called SOS UK. So that's Students Organising for Sustainability. This is a great charity which is based in the UK but has international campaigns where you can get involved with looking at audits at your school and your university to see how you can incorporate some more sustainable swaps actually within the institution, not in people's personal lifestyles, but in the institution itself. And in turn, by doing that, you're picking up some great skills for your CV. So check out SOS UK, speak to your friends and family about this. Please don't underestimate the power of your existing network. I get loads of people messaging me saying, Steph, how did you get a following? Like, how do I get more followers? Don't focus on the number of followers, focus on the quality conversations that you're having with your existing friends and family, because that goes a long way. And finally, I'd say support biodiversity at a local level, support your wildlife trust, because if we want to have global change from a biodiversity perspective, how are we going to do it if we're not thinking about biodiversity in our own back garden? So that goes a really, really long way. And just one final slide to finish on. Please don't forget, and maybe a closing note for the presentation and the workshop that we've had today is, don't ever think that you're too small to make a difference. If anyone has taught us that, it's Greta. Now, you don't have to be the next Greta Thunberg by any means. What we need actually is just everyday people doing what they can, and collectively that will just add up to something huge, and it will create a wave of change across not just the UK, but globally. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We're just going to do a poll again. It's just launching now, I hope, on what you were talking about, asking people, would they sort of follow your example? Would they use their own personal social media to shout about the environment and sustainability? And also just asking, you know, will they take away some of your top tips and do some of the things in their own life? So we'll leave that open for a few minutes, but what we're going to do now is move on to the question and answer section for the entire panel. So if we can get the panel to switch all their cameras back on, I'm going to be handpicking some of the questions we've had come in, because we've had some really great ones come in. There's absolutely loads. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get through all of them, but what we will do is make sure we send around in the follow-up email some answers to the ones that we didn't get around to answering during the webinar today. So we're going to start once the poll has finished with some questions for Claire. Can't see her at the moment, so hopefully she'll appear in a second. Oh, there she is. Brilliant. Sorry, Lou?
I was just saying the results of that poll look like after Steph's talk, people really feel that they can take action and make a difference to the planet, which is great news. Okay, over to you with questions then.
Fantastic. So the first one's for you, Claire, because I appreciate you have to go fairly rapidly, so we'll get yours going first. So we have a question from Eva. Can you still speak to your MPs and representative, even if you feel like you're not very knowledgeable about politics or political terms?
Yes, absolutely. I think the only thing that's important is that you are knowledgeable about the thing that you want to present to them, or that you have an ask of something that you want them to do. And, you know, sometimes people write to me just to say, I'm really concerned about X issue. What is the government doing? And then I write back to them and explain what's going on. So yes, absolutely. You don't need to be abreast of all the political terms in order to contact your MP.
Fab. So the next one just for you. I'm a bit worried because my MP didn't vote for the Environment Bill amendments earlier in the year. What would you suggest I could do to change their mind?
Well, like I said, usually by the time you get to the amendment point, it's difficult to influence an MP's mind on the eve of a vote. And to give an example of why some of those amendments might have been voted down, I remember that one of them was about setting an air pollution target for 2020, a quite stringent one, but actually in the legislation of the bill, it already said that we were going to seek to set targets, I think by 22, but we wanted to do some more evidence gathering exactly how those should work to make them practicable. So they might have very good reason to have voted the way they did, but you can always write to them to ask why they voted in a certain way. They can explain to you their thinking. And if you think that's wrong, you can go back and say, well, actually, I do think it's really important because of X, Y, and Z. So I would say you can just contact them and start that conversation if it's something that you deeply care about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire. Do you have time for one more question, or have you got to shoot?
No, I definitely can.
Okay, fab. Last question for you then. What are your opinions on Greta and the school climate strikes? Do you think that they should have been allowed to go ahead, or would you support them happening in the future?
Well, I mean, I used to work with lots of disadvantaged children. So on the whole, I'd like people to be in school. I think that's a good thing. But I would say on this particular issue, as Stephanie mentioned, there are so many things that we need people to do at a personal level, these small actions, these decisions they need to make every single day, which is quite hard to affect change. People kind of get the big momentous actions, but every day thinking, oh, I should probably not get it from Amazon but walk to my high street, or I should get on the bus, or I should walk or cycle, or I shouldn't waste any food, or buy my clothes on eBay. Like, that's what I do. But I think every day you have to make these small actions. And so I think the amazing thing about Greta is she has really made this a sort of whole world actually campaign to encourage people to take all of those small actions, and I think that is incredibly powerful.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for all of your insights onto lobbying and Parliament and the way MPs work. And we'll let you go now to your next meeting. But thank you very much for coming tonight. And I will move on to some questions for the wider poll. I can see that Craig's picked one out that he'd like to give an answer to, which is a fab question. And I think is one that we can get answers from across the panel. So we have a question coming from Rebecca. What is your advice for people trying to get into environmental jobs and careers?
Yeah, so thanks, Ben. Great question. I mean, I get asked this all the time, which I'm delighted to say. I mean, it's fantastic. So many people, particularly young people, asking this question, of course. The big thing I would say is get involved, volunteer and get involved in a local organisation. So, I mean, obviously you can volunteer and often get involved in a local wildlife trust, I would say that. But there are so many organisations that you can get involved in and be active in. And just by doing that, you're learning skills and you're learning more about the sector, and you're getting the kind of connections and getting more familiar with it, and that can make a real difference. It's also, the kind of when people undertake projects in their school or university, when I was at school, quite a long time ago now, but I set up a recycling scheme in my school, and then that actually was really important to build those skills that you then take forward into the next thing. And when it comes to trying to get the first job in this area, you can draw on all your experience of doing that. You can use that during the interview to say, this is why I care so much about it. Of course, it's also very useful that sometimes some of the subject choices you might make will make a difference on this. And you can learn about the relevant issues. But more generally, if you can demonstrate you've got that passion and commitment, and you can learn through volunteering and through activism actually what this is like, you'll build up that stock of experience that will make all the difference.
Do any of the others want to chip in on that, or go Sarah Jane?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, obviously I really support what Craig has just said there about getting involved, get out there, get volunteering. But I also just wanted to make the point that actually there is such a breadth of jobs now that will become available in the future working in this area. You might have a real interest in technology or in the digital world or in computing. Ben himself, in fact, is one of our geographic information system specialists, so mapping on computers. Or you might want to get involved from a policy or planning perspective. So I would say many people think about working in the environmental sector as sort of getting out there and doing things on the ground, and of course that's really, really important, but there is such a breadth of opportunities and a breadth of skills that you can develop and bring to this sort of environmental career that I would really encourage you to think really broadly about how you might get involved in this sort of job opportunity. It's a great career to have if this is where you're interested.
Great. Stephanie and Katy, you got anything to say, or shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, you go first, Steph. I was going to say something really brief afterwards.
I'm just going to add onto Sarah's point. That's extremely valid. I mean, in terms of the curriculum, we need sustainability embedded across the curriculum. And actually, many people that aren't in environmental or conservation-based jobs are contributing towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you are a midwife or if you are a pharmacist, you're supporting towards good health and well-being, which is actually one of the UN SDGs. So yes, there are elements of the kind of more environmental based jobs of sustainability that are there, but there is just so much out there for you to get involved in. And just a piece of advice from me is, don't ever discount the opportunities you have at this young age. I've got things on my CV still, which I did when I was at college, because I'm still so proud of them. And it, like Craig says, it leads on from one thing to another. So just say yes to opportunities, and if you can, try and make them for yourself as well.
And I'll keep it really brief and was just going to say, for those who don't feel like they have the opportunity, the time, the money to be able to volunteer, live your passion in other ways and in your free time, so that when you go to those interviews, you can really demonstrate in all kinds of ways. You know, this industry does talk a lot about volunteering, and that's how you build up that experience, but there are other ways to do it. And I did that. I volunteered as well, but as a child, I was known as Katy Bird, and still am at times. It was what I got out and did. I loved birds, I still do, and it really helped me in interviews. And you can demonstrate that passion at interview and talk about it well and show that commitment. It doesn't always have to be done through volunteering, which I think sometimes people feel like it is, but there are other ways to get in there.
Great, thanks everyone. Those are some really good answers, and I think probably that question is something that resonates to a lot of the people listening, because it is something quite daunting when you're that young, knowing how to get into this industry. So a question next for you, Steph. What are the best sustainable actions to raise with my school, considering I live in a really busy city area?
I would ask your school how they are, where are they purchasing their energy from? Is it from a renewable energy supplier? Could they consider putting renewable energy into the school design, so solar panels and wind turbines? That's fantastic. If you're concerned about climate change, that's one direct way you can make a difference. If you're concerned around waste management as well, you could ask them around reusable. So I think you need to have a think about what is the thing that concerns you. Is it biodiversity loss? Is it climate change? Obviously, all of these things are linked, but going back to Craig's point about that successful campaign, think about the one ask, the one easy thing that you can ask them to do. And then once they've got that implemented, move on to the next thing. So it's difficult because there's never one answer, and all schools are different. Some may already have renewable power in place, but ask the question first. That will be a good starting point for sure. And make sure you get the teachers to help you, because that's the thing. It shouldn't just be up to the students to come up with the solutions. You're there to ignite the passion and the change, but the teachers should be taking the lead on making sure that the institution itself is running operationally in a sustainable way.
Great advice there. Thank you, Steph. So next question, again, it's one Craig's picked out, but also one that we've had quite a lot of coming in about rewilding. So it might be, again, something that multiple people want to speak on. So we've had people asking the panel, what are your opinions about rewilding? How do you feel about, in particular, the reintroduction of predators like wolves and lynxes?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally, the Wildlife Trust, we want to, as I said, to get nature working again. So in principle, obviously, we'd love to see the reintroduction of species that are missing, but it's got to be done right. And it's got to be done with the support of communities, and it's got to be done with the support of sort of wider stakeholders and landowners and so on. One of the things that could be a real problem is that if it's done badly, if there's any sense that local communities have had species reintroductions, they feel it's forced on them, then you could get a reaction against that, and then kind of projects like that could become unpopular, and actually that means it sets our whole mission back. But actually, if we can do it in such a way that actually people will embrace and celebrate these kind of species reintroductions, as has been done largely, say, with reintroductions of beavers, then that can make a huge difference. But on taking something like the reintroduction of lynx, which is something that I know some individual wildlife trusts in parts of the country are looking at, one of the things that's interesting about that is, you have overpopulation, if you like, of deer in some bits of the country, real problems with the numbers of deer we've got in some bits of the UK. And actually, one of the best ways to deal with that would be to reintroduce lynx. But I said it's got to be done right. It's got to be done in a planned way. There's a lot of kind of thinking that needs to be done to get it right. But if it where it can be done, it would be a fantastic thing to do. And there's nothing more amazing than seeing species like at the moment beavers or pine martens coming back that we've lost in the past.
I feel like Craig said it all brilliantly, and the only thing I'll add is that for me, rewilding is about creating the space, maybe intervening at the start, but then stepping back and letting natural processes take over. And I'm 100% for that. I think sometimes people, you know, there's a good line in there, you know, oh, wolves, people want wolves back and things like that. And I feel like that's just muddying the conversation, you know. At its heart, it is about letting nature have the space and the opportunity for natural process to take over again. And I'm 100% for that.
Great, thank you both. A really, really interesting topic. It's definitely a hot one at the moment in conservation. Just keeping time in mind, and we want to get as many of these questions in as possible. I'm just going to move on to one for Sarah Jane. So, bit of a controversial one, which is always fun to talk about. Do you agree that it might be the case that nature-based solutions are just distracting from solving the root problem, which is reducing the amount of CO2 emissions?
No, I don't think it's distracting. I think that anything that we do is important. We've got to take action in whatever way we can. I think it's really important that we recognise that climate and biodiversity, as Craig talked about as well, are inextricably linked. And so impacting one in a beneficial way will also impact the other. We have challenges around that. So for example, I mentioned Surrey is the most wooded county in England. Therefore, tree planting is not necessarily always the most appropriate response in a county like Surrey in order to address climate change issues. But as I mentioned earlier, we have a fantastic natural carbon store in the lowland heathlands that we look after. So there are different ways of approaching both climate change and biodiversity. And what's important is that we have very transparent discussions around what it is we're trying to achieve, and then put in place the appropriate solution. So I don't think it's one or the other, but I think we do have to be really clear about what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Thanks for that answer, Sarah Jane. So we have time just for one more. So I've got quite a nice one to finish on, and hopefully it's one you can all chip into. So we've had someone say, I find a lot of people are shaming online for those who only do half a job, e.g. being vegan, but only on some days, or being vegetarian, but not full vegan. Do you agree that every little effort helps, and we should all stop gatekeeping and shaming people who are only making changes one step at a time?
I've just got one, like the best line I've ever heard on these kinds of topics was, we need millions of people doing it imperfectly rather than a few people doing it perfectly. Everyone has a place in that, you know, amazing work from the perfect people, but we won't get anywhere if there's just a couple of them.
Yeah, I completely agree to that. There's no such thing as a perfect environmentalist or a perfect, sustainability ambassador. We all need to have our individual niches of expertise for us to, actually deliver change in this. So yeah, we do need to stop shaming people. It won't create a space where people feel comfortable to open up and share about the changes they're making.
I completely agree on that as well. I think we do need, we've got to be really careful that we don't create any kind of polarization here, us and them. Actually, we want as many people to come this journey as possible. And therefore, we've got to be really welcoming and inclusive. And we often talk about the need for sort of greater diversity and greater inclusion in, say, the environment sector. And I feel really strongly that we need to do that. But, that's also about where people are coming from. It's not even just about, people's personal characteristics. It might be also where people are in the space and the debate, and how familiar they are with it, and the aspects of the journey they have to come on. We have to be very welcoming to everyone to get involved in this journey. That's incredibly important. And I think the other thing to say, no one is perfect. There isn't a single person anywhere in the world that is perfect on this issue, because basically the moment you start breathing, it's a bit of a challenge environmentally. So actually, that's why we all need to recognize that this is about doing what we can, and being open to thinking about new approaches and working together rather than pointing fingers and naming and shaming each other as individuals.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're nearly at the end of the evening, but we just wanted to say a couple of things. We don't want this to be the end of our journey with you. We do have a pot of money because this event was so generously supported by the People's Postcode Lottery and the Surrey Hill Society. We were going to have a face-to-face event, which was going to cost us money with transport and food costs, but we've put that money into a pot. We will be sending you details of how to apply for a small grant. If you can get a project up and running in your school grounds, then we will help kickstart that. This is going to be a fantastic experience for you if you can get into the planning and the costing up, convincing your leadership team, excuse me, the dog is banging, convincing your leadership team that this is a great idea, then it's a brilliant experience for your CV. And we really want the opportunity to work with you on your journey. If you're outside of Surrey, then we can put you in touch with the right people. We've got 46 wildlife trusts and they all want to work with young people. So do get in touch and we'll help you get your project started elsewhere. I'm going to hand over to Katy now because she's got an exciting competition to tell you about.
Yeah, and I can't think of a better place to launch the competition. And thank you everyone who has been talking about giving a voice and telling stories and bringing things to life to inspire other people, because we are launching a fantastic competition with some really amazing prizes, which have generously been sponsored by our corporates. But it's called the Cutting Hedge of Creativity, and it's a storytelling competition with a wild side. So whether you're a creative writer, a video maker, a vlogger, even a poet or a spoken word artist, whatever way you like to tell stories, we are putting the mantle to you to tell a story about hedgerows and give hedgerows a voice and enter our fantastic competition. So I'll just let Ben share a video that we've made to kind of highlight this.
Heard about hedgerows? Hedgerows are pretty amazing.
Oozing with life and creating safe pathways through countrysides, their homes, highways, all-you-can-eat buffets and even overnight pit stops.
For hundreds of years, they've been a vital part of the British landscape.
The hedgerows are struggling. They need our help, and we need you to tell their stories.
Calling all budding natural science enthusiasts, short story writers, journalists, artists, and social media influencers. Are you at the cutting hedge of creativity?
How would you make people take notice of hedges? Can you tell amazing hedgerow tales? A hedgerow through the season with butterflies, bugs or bees in? A food source for a mouse or a cosy birdhouse?
Whether your passion is poetry, art, video making, science or history, we want you to help us tell a story about how important hedgerows are to wildlife.
We know that not all stories are written in books, so tell us about hedgerows your way.
Enter Surrey Wildlife Trust storytelling competition and holla about hedgerows. Be in a chance to win some fantastic prizes. Visit our webpage at surreywildlifetrust.org/cutting hedge creativity.
Have you heard about hedgerows? Well, you're going to.
I'm never going to like seeing myself on videos, but there you go. We would welcome entries from everyone and we'd love you to give hedgerows a voice.
Just before I hand over, thanks Katy, and thanks very much to everyone. Before I hand over to Sarah Jane, I promised to plug an event that the Wildlife Trust are running on the 31st of March at 5:30. If you're interested in understanding more and engaging with politics and democracy, they are running an event. It's all free and you can sign up on the Wildlife Trust website and we'll send you the link after this. Also, the People Assembly of Surrey have got in touch. They really want young people taking part in their visioning statement exercise to look at how Surrey should look to them by 2030. So we'll send you details of that event as well. That's happening on the 22nd of April at 8 o'clock. And again, send you details to sign up. Okay, so over to Sarah Jane.
Thank you so much, Lou. And I have to say, this evening is one of the reasons why I always feel so privileged that I work for a wildlife trust. It is, you know, it's fantastic. It's inspiring. It's brilliant to hear all the speakers this evening. And there is that genuine sense, although sometimes we feel a little bit overwhelmed by the size of the challenge, actually, the sense of community that we have here and the sense that if we come together, we really can make the difference that we need, I think is the real takeaway for me whenever we do things like this. Because not only can we make a difference as an individual by making different choices, by just doing that small thing, whether it's joining Katy's hedge creativity initiative, or whether it's going out in your own garden and making a little pile of dead wood, or looking after the earthworms in your garden, then all of these things make a difference, and collectively we can make a difference to what happens in the future. And it is your future, so it is absolutely your opportunity to make the future that you want, and we are here to help you to do that. So use us, get in touch with us, and we will help you as much as you can to make that difference. I would really like to thank the sponsors of our event today. As Lou said, the Wildlife Trust, People's Postcode Lottery Fund, and also the Surrey Hills Society have been a great supporter of this event when we've put it on. So very grateful to them. I'd really like to thank all our speakers who have been phenomenally inspiring, and we are so grateful that they gave up their time this evening and their knowledge and their experience to share it with us. So massive round of applause and thank you to all of you. I would really like, however, to thank all of you for attending this evening and for sticking with us. It's a really different format to do this in. There's been a huge behind the scenes team, Lou and Ben and others that you haven't seen, who have put a lot of effort into this. So thank you to them as well. But it's really important, and you are the most important people in the room today. Thank you for attending, and do keep in touch with us. Thank you, Ben. You can close the meeting now. We look forward to seeing you again soon.